Today we're going to talk about the forgotten life of prostitutes in Victorian England. The city officially records nearly 8,600 fallen women in 1850, a statistic quoted in sober parliamentary papers with the precision of a church census. Yet historians still argue whether the true number was double that figure or perhaps only half. The fog seems to hide more than faces. It conceals the very mathematics of survival. Behind a respectable curtain, you pause under a lamp to read a chalked message someone has scribbled on brick. Good time, 2 pennies, no questions. A marketing plan as blunt as those sandwich board advertisements, hawking cough syrup for consumption. The fog wraps around you like a damp blanket that forgot how to provide warmth, and a sudden gust scuttles newspapers along the gutter. You spot a sensational headline shrieking virtue and ruin. Melodrama that sells for a penny, though the reality beneath costs considerably more. A mainstream fact lurks beneath this theatrical gloom. In 1839, the Metropolitan Police Act allowed plainclothes officers to patrol these very lanes, hoping to curb vice, but often settling instead for small bribes and a convenient wink. One such officer laughs nearby, pocketing a coin while pretending to adjust his collar. The joke practically writes itself, though it comes tax-free. You breathe in the mingled sense of roasted chestnuts and open sewers. Victorian London rarely offered neutral aromas, and you make a mental note that scented candles might be preferable bedroom decor. A slim figure in a frayed shawl approaches and offers a smile with more gaps than pearls. She jokes that her office hours are longer than the factories, which, considering some mills ran 18-hour shifts, manages to be both tragic and wry. So before you get comfortable in this shadowed world, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are listening from and what time the clock is striking for you. Now dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your steps carry you past the grimy facade of a pawn shop, its window crammed with tarnished trinkets, pocket watches, wedding rings, silk gloves with fingers worn thin. A silent auction of desperate exchanges. Somewhere deep in the alley, a whistle trills twice. The coded signal that a client has been found, or perhaps that a constable has turned the corner, depending on how your luck runs tonight. You try not to trip over a loose cobble. The stone leaps up like it wants a turn at slapstick comedy. Remember, you came here for history, but the street gives you vaudeville too. Beyond a corner, a crooked sign reads Coffee House, though the beverage inside is half chicory and half mystery. You duck in, fingers tingling from cold, and a wave of heat fogs your spectacles. The night stretches before you, full of stories the history books forgot to mention, written in fog and lamplight on cobblestones that have witnessed more confessions than any cathedral. Numbers tell lies as easily as truth, and nowhere is this clearer than in Victorian London's careful accounting of human desperation. You stand beneath a gas lamp, watching a clerk in a weathered bowler hat scratch figures into a leather-bound ledger. His quill scratches against paper like a mouse in the walls, recording what the government chooses to see. The city officially records nearly 8,600 fallen women in 1850, a statistic quoted in sober parliamentary papers with the precision of a church census. Yet historians still argue whether the true number was double that figure or perhaps only half. The Metropolitan Police tallied arrests, the workhouses counted admissions, and charitable societies enumerated their rescues, but none bothered to ask the women themselves. A mainstream fact emerges from this numerical fog. Bureaucrats counted the same women multiple times across different institutions, inflating figures to justify funding while simultaneously unaccounting to avoid scandal. The mathematics of morality, it seems, require creative bookkeeping. You follow the clerk down a narrow lane where he pauses to interview a woman mending stockings by lamplight. Occupation? He inquires, pen poised. Seamstress. She replies without looking up, though her needle moves too slowly for anyone making a living wage. He dutifully records seamstress, while calculating her true profession from the rouge on her cheeks and the strategic tears in her dress. The first joke writes itself. Government statistics were about as reliable as London weather forecasts, consistently wrong, but issued with unwavering confidence. In Whitechapel alone, police estimated 1,200 women worked the streets, yet only 62 appeared on official registers. The discrepancy might puzzle mathematicians, but it made perfect sense to anyone who understood that visibility meant vulnerability. Smart women stayed invisible to census takers while remaining highly visible to paying customers. The clerk consults a second ledger, this one tracking disease rates. Venereal infection, he notes, affect an estimated 15% of London women, a figure that conveniently ignores the fact that testing occurred primarily in workhouses and lock hospitals, where the poorest and sickest women ended up. The second joke practically writes itself. Medical statistics were gathered with all the scientific rigor of reading tea leaves, but with considerably less accuracy. You watch as two constables argue over their patrol reports. One claims 18 arrests this week. The other insists on 24. Neither bother counting the same woman arrested 3 times under different names. Their sergeant resolves a dispute by averaging the figures. Mathematical precision applied to complete fiction. Parliamentary debates cite wildly different numbers, depending on whether speakers want to demonstrate the problem's magnitude or the success of reform efforts. Conservative estimates range from 7,000 to radical claims exceeding 80,000 women in London alone. The truth, like fog, shifted with the wind in the observer's position. A quirky tidbit emerges from the statistical chaos. Some women learn to game the system, registering with multiple charities to collect aid packages, giving different names to different census takers, and maintaining several official identities. They became statistical ghosts simultaneously everywhere and nowhere in the bureaucratic imagination. The third joke completes itself. Victorian record-keeping was so thorough that the same woman could be simultaneously a reformed Magdalene, an active prostitute, a respectable seamstress, and a workhouse inmate, a mathematical miracle that would have impressed ancient alchemists. Meet Sarah Collins, though that name appears nowhere in official records. At 17, she stood in the servants' hall of a Belgravia townhouse, starched apron crisp, future seemingly secure. The housekeeper had praised her silver polishing technique, and the cook declared her pastry skills adequate for advancement. Sarah earned £12 annually, a respectable wage for a kitchen maid in 1868. The mathematics seemed simple enough. £12 yearly, minus £3 for uniform, soap, and basic necessities. £9 remained for family support, savings, and the occasional luxury of a penny dreadful. She calculated carefully. 6 shillings monthly to her widowed mother in Birmingham, 2 shillings for her own modest needs, leaving £4 annually for emergencies. A sustainable equation, until arithmetic met reality. The first crack appeared when Lord Pemberton's nephew visited for Christmas. Young men of quality, Sarah learned, considered servant girls part of the household amenities. When she declined his advances with appropriate firmness, he complained to his uncle about insolent staff behavior. The butler, protecting the family's reputation over a maid's dignity, suggested Sarah might find employment elsewhere more suitable to her temperament. Without a proper reference, Sarah discovered that domestic service operated on trust networks as rigid as bank credit systems. Employment agencies demanded written recommendations detailing character, skills, and reasons for departure. A single misstep pushed many toward precarious trades, and Sarah's refusal to accommodate aristocratic privilege qualified as several missteps simultaneously. She spent her savings, £4, 3 shillings, on lodgings while seeking new position. Respectable boarding houses charged 8 shillings weekly, leaving her precisely 7 weeks to find employment before destitution. The first joke emerged from desperation. She possessed more references from former employers' dogs than from employers themselves, since she spent considerable time walking their pets. Factory work offered alternatives, but at devastating cost. Cotton mills paid 6 shillings weekly for 14-hour shifts, barely enough for food and shelter. Match factories offered 7 shillings but poisoned workers with phosphorus fumes, earning the nickname Fossy Jaw factories. Laundry work paid 5 shillings for hands that emerged raw and bleeding from caustic soap. Sarah calculated survival economics with increasing desperation. Cheapest lodgings, for shillings weekly. Minimal food, 2 shillings. Clothing maintenance, 1 shilling. The mathematics left her 1 shilling short even on factory wages. Assuming she found employment, maintained perfect health, and required nothing beyond basic survival. A mainstream fact cuts through the arithmetic. Women's wages in legitimate employment averaged 30 to 40% of men's wages for comparable work, creating an economic gap that made independent survival nearly impossible for single women without family support. The second joke wrote itself when Sarah realized she could earn more in one evening than in a week at the match factory, though the comparison felt less amusing when calculating the associated risks. Street work offered brutal economics. Encounters paid between 6 pence and 5 shillings depending on location, client wealth, and services provided. Working Piccadilly's gaslit corners, an attractive woman might earn 10 shillings nightly. The same woman in Whitechapel might struggle for 2 shillings. Location determined income as surely as postcode determined rent. Sarah stood at the corner of Great Marlborough Street on a February evening, having consumed her last piece of bread that morning. The cold bit through her thin shawl, but hunger bit deeper. She had calculated the mathematics of survival in every possible combination, and they all led to the same conclusion. The transition required no ceremony, no official registration, no formal training. She simply stood beneath a gas lamp and waited. When the first gentleman approached, tipping his hat politely, she quoted the going rate for her new profession with the same precision she once used measuring flour for Lord Pemberton's breakfast scones. The third joke completed itself. She had become an independent businesswoman through economic necessity, entering the only profession where women could potentially earn living wages, though the cost of admission remained carefully uncalculated. Victorian society constructed elaborate hierarchies in every profession, and the world's oldest profession proved no exception. Like a twisted mirror of respectable society, sex work reflected the same rigid class distinctions that governed drawing rooms and factory floors, complete with unspoken rules, territorial boundaries, and coded behaviors that determined survival. At the pyramid's apex stood the courtesans, women who commanded 50 guineas for an evening's companionship. These elite practitioners maintained Mayfair apartments, employed personal maids, and received clients by appointment only. They spoke French, played piano, and discussed literature with the same facility they applied to more intimate arts. Catherine Walters, known as Skittles, drove her own carriage through Hyde Park and counted aristocrats among her regular patrons. The first joke emerged from this rarefied atmosphere. Courtesans often possessed better educations than the wives of their clients, leading to awkward moments when intellectual conversation exceeded matrimonial standards. Below the courtesans operated the pretty horse breakers, women who maintained the appearance of respectability while conducting discreet arrangements. They charged 5 to 20 pounds per encounter and often maintained long-term relationships with wealthy merchants or minor nobility. These women mastered the art of being simultaneously visible and invisible, attending opera performances while advertising availability through subtle signals. The middle tier consisted of brothel workers in established houses. Quality establishments charged clients 2 to 10 pounds, with women receiving roughly half after house expenses. These venues offered regulated environments, medical attention, and protection from street violence, though at the cost of personal freedom and financial autonomy. A quirky tidbit illuminates the complexity of communication within this world. Fans became sophisticated signaling devices. A fan held against the right cheek indicated interest in conversation. Twirling suggested availability. Snapping shut warned of danger or unwelcome attention. Similarly, clothing conveyed coded messages. Yellow ribbons indicated temporary availability. Blue suggested premium services, while red warned competitors of territorial claims. Street walkers occupied the hierarchy's bottom rung, earning 6 pence to 5 shillings for encounter, depending on location and desperation levels. These women worked without protection, medical care, or guaranteed shelter, vulnerable to violence from clients, police, and territorial competitors. The second joke wrote itself in bitter irony. Street workers faced the greatest dangers while earning the smallest profits, proving that economic risk and reward operated in inverse proportion. Geography determined destiny within this underground economy. The West End's gaslit streets commanded premium prices, where well-dressed women could earn more in one evening than factory workers made weekly. Regent Street, Piccadilly, and the Haymarket attracted wealthy clients seeking discretion and quality companionship. Moving eastward, prices dropped precipitously. Commercial Road offered middle-tier arrangements for merchant sailors and clerks. Whitechapel's narrow alleys cater to dock workers and casual laborers, where desperation drove prices to survival levels. The Ratcliffe Highway specialized in international clientele, where women learned basic phrases in multiple languages to serve foreign sailors. Some areas developed specializations. Certain streets cater to specific fetishes, others to particular nationalities, creating microeconomies within the larger system. A mainstream fact emerges from this geographic complexity. Police enforcement varied dramatically by district wealth, with West End establishments operating through discrete arrangements, while East End women faced regular harassment and arrest. Each level maintained distinct rules, dress codes, and behavioral expectations. Crossing boundaries without invitation resulted in swift punishment, economic boycotts, physical violence, or police attention. The third joke revealed itself through this rigid structure. An industry built on breaking social rules maintained stricter behavioral codes than many legitimate professions. The underground economy's complexity rivaled any commercial enterprise, complete with supply chains, quality control, territorial agreements, and competitive strategies that would have impressed legitimate businessmen, had they been willing to acknowledge such parallels. Dawn breaks over Whitechapel like a reluctant witness, casting pale light across cobblestones glazed with frost that cracks underfoot like broken promises. The November air carries a mingled sense of coal smoke, horse dung, and the distant Thames, London's daily perfume, democratic in its reach across all social classes. Mary Fitzgerald stirs on her section of rope bed, a Victorian innovation in efficient poverty. 20 women share this dormitory space, suspended over hemp lines stretched wall to wall like human washing hung out to dry. The rope digs into her hip as she shifts, calculating the hours of sleep against the coins remaining in her hidden pocket. 3 shillings 2 pennies, enough for tonight's lodging if today proves profitable. She joins the queue for communal basin, where cold water awaits those willing to brave its embrace. The luxury of warm washing water costs an extra penny, money better spent on bread than comfort. She scrubs her face with a sliver of carbolic soap, harsh enough to strip paint, but effective against the previous night's cosmetic remnants. The mirror, a piece of polished tin nailed to the wall, reflects a face that's learned to disguise exhaustion as a lure. Breakfast consists of weak tea that tastes like dishwater had ambitions, and day-old bread hard enough to substitute for cobblestones. She counts her remaining coins while chewing. Rent costs 4 pennies nightly. Food requires 2 more, leaving her needing at least 6 pennies a day just to break even. The mathematics of survival never sleep, even when their practitioners must. The morning marketplace buzzes with potential. Dock workers stumbling from night shifts, their pockets heavy with weekly wages paid at dawn. These men represent opportunity. Flush with money, exhausted enough to make poor decisions, and heading home to wives who ask too many questions. The first joke emerges from observation. She competes with fishmongers for the best corner spots, though her catch tends to be more profitable and considerably less aromatic. A mainstream fact illuminates the economics. Legitimate working women earn 6 to 12 shillings weekly in factories or domestic service, while a single client might pay 2 to 5 shillings for an hour's companionship. The mathematics explain everything the moral reformers refuse to acknowledge. Strategic positioning requires careful analysis. Coffee houses attract clerks warming themselves before beginning their daily drudgery. Men with limited funds but predictable schedules. Omnibus stops offer brief encounters with travelers, though timing becomes crucial as vehicles maintain increasingly reliable schedules. She adjusts her shawl to signal availability, tilts her bonnet at the prescribed angle indicating moderate pricing, and positions her parasol to catch morning light while advertising her presence. Competition arrives in the form of 3 other women claiming territory around the same intersection. Territorial disputes over prime locations can turn violent, though usually they're resolved through negotiated schedules, morning shifts, afternoon rotations, evening exclusivity arrangements. The unspoken rules govern everything. Newcomers defer to established workers. Specialty services command premium positioning, and nobody poaches another's regular clients without facing collective punishment. Weather proves the morning's wild card. November drizzle drives potential clients indoors, forcing women to follow them into public houses, coffee shops, and covered markets where proprietors may or may not tolerate their presence. The second joke writes itself. Umbrellas become fishing nets in reverse, designed to catch what you need while keeping out what you don't want. Church bells chime 8 o'clock as the first potential client approaches. A dock supervisor whose confident stride suggests successful employment and whose wandering gaze indicates interest in more than morning conversation. Mary straightens her spine, arranges her expression into practice welcome, and begins another day's work in London's most reliable, if least respectable, profession. The morning routine complete. She prepares for negotiations that will determine whether tonight finds her warm and fed, or calculating tomorrow's increasingly desperate arithmetic. The gas lamp flickers against brick walls slick with November moisture, casting wavering shadows in the narrow alley behind the Lamb and Flag Tavern. Mary positions herself where the light catches her face while keeping escape routes visible, a calculation as precise as any merchant's inventory. The art of reading clients requires skills no finishing school taught, yet survival depends on instant assessment of character, sobriety, and financial capacity. A gentleman approaches, his gait steady despite the gin scent clinging to his wool coat. Good signs. Expensive buttons, clean fingernails, measured steps suggesting control, rather than stumbling intoxication. Dangerous drunks telegraph violence through aggressive posture and slurred demands. This one tips his hat politely, a promising beginning that suggests negotiation rather than coercion. "Good evening, miss," he ventures, the standard opening in this elaborate dance of commerce and desire. Mary responds with practiced warmth. "Evening to you, sir. Might you be seeking companionship on this cold night?" Price negotiations follow established protocols. 7 for a smile, 10 for a room, she quotes, the Whitechapel standard rate that accommodates working-class budgets while maintaining dignity. West End women command 20 shillings or more for similar services, but East End economics operate on different mathematics. Regional pricing reflects local economics as clearly as any market commodity. Luxury goods cost more in Mayfair than Mile End. The first joke emerges from observation. Clients' negotiation skills rarely match their enthusiasm, leading to haggling techniques that would embarrass market traders. This gentleman offers 8 shillings for privacy, displaying better business sense than most who confuse intimate services with charitable donations. A quirky tidbit illuminates the sophisticated communication networks. Hand signals developed from market traders' codes allowed women to share information across crowded spaces. A thumb pressed to palm warned of violent clients. Finger spread indicated police presence, while touching the left ear suggested profitable opportunities nearby. 3 women worked the same alley system, their safety depending on coordinated vigilance. Margaret stations herself at the street entrance, watching for constables or troublemakers. Agnes positions herself near the tavern's back door, ready to summon help if needed. The buddy system operates through necessity rather than friendship, though genuine bonds often develop through shared danger. The role of bullies, male protectors who demanded percentages of earnings, created complex calculations. Protection from violence competed with exploitation through forced dependency. Smart women preferred informal networks to individual protectors, sharing information about reliable clients while maintaining independence from would-be controllers. Client screening required constant vigilance. Known violent men earned blacklisting across entire districts through whispered warnings and shared intelligence. John Morrison, the dock foreman with scarred knuckles, rated universal avoidance after hospitalizing 2 women last spring. Such information traveled faster than newspaper gossip, distributed through networks invisible to police investigation. Location safety demanded strategic thinking. Well-lit areas offered visibility that deterred violence but attracted unwanted police attention. Private spaces provided discretion while eliminating witnesses if situations turned dangerous. Mary chose this alley for its compromise. Sufficient light for safety assessment, multiple escape routes, and proximity to allies without excessive constable traffic. Flash houses, boarding establishments that tolerated or encouraged commercial arrangements, offered semi-legitimate venues for conducting business. The Crown and Anchor maintained discreet rooms available by the hour, where proprietors who asked no questions provided payments arrived promptly. Such establishments operated through careful arrangements with local authorities, contributing to the complex web of official tolerance and selective enforcement. Police corruption created predictable patterns that experienced women learned to navigate. Constable Williams demanded weekly tributes, but provided reliable warnings about planned raids. Sergeant Murphy preferred individual arrangements with selected women rather than systematic corruption. The second joke wrote itself. Constables' patrol routes proved more predictable than railway timetables, allowing strategic positioning around their schedules. Historians still argue about actual crime rates versus reported incidents in these districts, as official statistics reflected police priorities rather than actual violence levels. Women rarely reported attacks, knowing that victim status offered little protection while creating unwanted official attention. Medical precautions represented desperate attempts at health maintenance. Primitive contraception included sponges soaked in vinegar, douching with various solutions, and timing calculations based on folk wisdom rather than medical knowledge. Disease prevention relied on visual inspection of clients and prayers to whatever deities might protect fallen women. The negotiation concludes successfully. 8 shillings for an hour's companionship in a nearby flash house room. The gentleman proves respectful. The transaction proceeds without incident, and Mary earns enough for 3 nights' lodging plus breakfast. Not every encounter ends so fortunately, but tonight mathematics and careful assessment align to produce survival with dignity intact. Evening fog rolls through London's narrow streets like a gray tide, carrying the promise of another bitter November night. Mary counts her coins one final time. 8 shillings from the afternoon's work, enough for lodging with a shilling left for tomorrow's bread. The arithmetic of survival requires constant calculation. 4 pennies for the rope bed, 6 for a shared room, or 8 pennies for the luxury of privacy in Mrs. Henderson's establishment on Dorset Street. The hierarchy of lodging houses reflects London's rigid class distinctions in miniature. At the bottom, penny hangs offer standing room against a rope stretched across a cellar. Sleep while leaning forward. Fall when exhaustion overwhelms balance. 2-penny lodgings provide floor space on straw mattresses shared with strangers. 4-penny houses offer rope beds suspended between walls, while the aristocracy of the homeless, those with 6 to 8 pennies, secure actual beds in shared rooms. Mrs. Henderson's lodging house exhales a familiar perfume of poverty. Stale gin, unwashed bodies, carbolic soap, and boiled cabbage from the communal kitchen. The sounds form an orchestra of desperation, coughing that never stops. Children crying themselves to sleep, muffled arguments through thin walls, and the constant creak of rope beds under shifting bodies. 43 people share this 3-story building designed for half that number, creating intimacy through necessity rather than choice. A mainstream fact emerges from the overcrowding. London had over 8,000 registered lodging houses by 1870, accommodating an estimated 80,000 people nightly. The numbers reflect not just poverty, but the complete absence of affordable housing for the working poor, creating an industry built on society's failure to provide basic shelter. Mrs. Henderson herself represents the lodging housekeeper archetype, a woman of 50 with knowing eyes who once worked these same streets before arthritis and age forced career changes. She maintains order through practical psychology, credit for regulars, swift eviction for troublemakers, and selective blindness regarding her tenants' nighttime activities. The first joke emerges from a pragmatic approach. Bed bugs provide the only reliable tenancy in her establishment, never missing rent payments, and showing remarkable loyalty to their chosen accommodations. Shared spaces create temporary communities of survival. The kitchen single fire draws women, seeking warmth more than cooking facilities. Washing areas become centers of information exchange, which constables demand bribes, which clients pay promptly, which districts offer safer working conditions. Temporary friendships form over shared hardships, though competition for the same resources creates underlying tensions that surface during lean periods. Some lodging houses operate as fronts for organized sex work. Coffee house establishments maintain ground floor respectability, while upper floors facilitate commercial arrangements. These venues charge higher rates, 10 to 15 pennies nightly, but provide discreet access for clients and protection from street violence. The arrangements suit everyone. Lodging keepers earn higher profits, women gain security, and clients enjoy convenient discretion. Storage presents constant challenges when everything valuable must remain on your person. Mary's possessions fit in a canvas bag worn beneath her dress. spare undergarments, small mirror, cosmetics, needle and thread, and the precious reference letter from her last legitimate employment. The bag never leaves her body. Lodging house theft operates as efficiently as any organized crime syndicate. Weekend versus weekday rates reflect the economic pressures of timing. Friday and Saturday nights command premium prices as wages arrive and social inhibitions relax. Sunday through Thursday rates drop by half, creating feast or famine cycles that determine weekly survival prospects. A quirky tidbit illustrates the system's efficiency. Some establishments rent bed space by the hour during busy periods, maximizing profits through rapid turnover that would impress modern hotel managers. Eviction threats provide constant motivation for earning daily rent. Missed 3 consecutive payments and personal belongings, if any remain, end up on the street alongside their former owner. The second joke writes itself with bitter accuracy. Lodging house rules rival prison regulations for complexity, except prisons provide more reliable meals and greater security. Alternative shelters await those unable to afford even penny hangs. Church steps offer marginal protection from weather while risking constable harassment. Railway arches provide wind barriers but attract thieves and violent drifters. Doorways of closed businesses become temporary refuges until morning commerce resumes. The workhouse looms as a final option, institutional shelter that strips away remaining dignity along with personal freedom. Mrs. Henderson accepts Mary's 4 pennies with professional efficiency, assigning rope bed number 12 in the women's dormitory. Gas lamps dim throughout the building as night deepens, leaving only scattered candle flames to illuminate the settling forms of London's dispossessed. Mary arranges her shawl as both pillow and blanket, suspends herself over the rope with practiced skill, and prepares for another night's uneasy rest in a city that offers survival, but rarely comfort to those who work at shadows. Dawn breaks over Covent Garden's wholesale market like a reluctant creditor, illuminating the desperate arithmetic of survival playing out among scattered cabbage leaves and dropped turnips. Mary joins a small army of scavengers who arrive before the sweepers, competing with children and elderly women for vegetables too bruised for retail sale, but still edible for those who cannot afford choice. The economy of survival operates on brutal prioritization. Food comes first, always, followed by shelter, then clothing maintenance. Luxuries disappear in strict order. Soap before sugar, tea before meat, warmth before comfort. A mainstream fact cuts through the morning mist. Average daily food costs reach 6 pence for minimal nutrition, yet earnings arrived irregularly, creating feast or famine cycles that define working-class existence. Street vendors hawk breakfast solutions for those with pennies to spare. Hot potatoes steaming from wheeled braziers cost a halfpenny and provide both nutrition and temporary hand warmers. Meat pies of questionable content sell for 2 pence. Their gravy thick enough to mask ingredients better left unidentified. The first joke emerges from desperate pragmatism. Gin qualified as a food group among the poor, providing calories, warmth, and merciful numbness against empty stomachs and bleak prospects. Clothing maintenance requires constant vigilance when appearances determine earning potential. Mary spends precious morning minutes mending torn seams with needle and thread purchased for a farthing. Washing involves cold water from public pumps, carbolic soap rationed by the sliver, and air-drying arrangements that compete with London's persistent dampness. A clean dress and mended stockings can mean the difference between attracting clients or being dismissed as too desperate for profitable engagement. The pawn shop cycle provides essential financial flexibility for those with possessions worth monetizing. Mary's mother's wedding ring travels regularly between her finger and Uncle Isaac's establishment on Petticoat Lane. Pawned during desperate weeks, reclaimed when earnings improve. The system operates on careful timing. Pawned items hold for 1 month before sale, creating countdown pressure that intensifies survival mathematics. Medical care remains largely self-administered through folk remedies and whatever substances promise relief. Gin serves multiple medicinal purposes: antiseptic for wounds, painkiller for chronic ailments, and general anesthetic for life's accumulated injuries. Laudanum, when affordable, provides more effective pain relief but carries addictive risks that desperate women often ignore. Herbal knowledge passes between women like inherited wisdom. Willow bark for fever, pennyroyal for unwanted pregnancies, wormwood for stomach ailments. A quirky tidbit illustrates the intersection of medical need and economic reality. Some women traded sexual favors directly for medical treatment when cash proved unavailable. Local physicians, chemists, and even dentists occasionally accepted such arrangements, creating parallel economies that operated outside normal commercial structures. Pregnancy presents particularly complex challenges in a profession where physical incapacity means financial disaster. Limited options included dangerous procedures performed by unqualified practitioners using primitive instruments, herbal abortifacients that poison as often as they terminated pregnancies, or carrying a term while continuing work until physically impossible. Community support networks provided crucial assistance, older women sharing knowledge, temporary financial support during recovery, and childcare arrangements that allowed new mothers to return to earning income. The moral compromises of survival create internal conflicts that religion and respectability never address. Stealing food competes with earning it through methods society condemns equally. Mary calculates the relative risks. Theft might result in imprisonment, but guarantees immediate sustenance, while commercial sex work provides income but risks violence, disease, and social ostracism. The mathematics of desperation recognize no moral absolutes. The workhouse looms as society's final safety net. Institutional care that strips away personal freedom, dignity, and hope in exchange for basic subsistence. Women avoid this fate through extraordinary measures, accepting almost any alternative that preserves some degree of autonomy and self-determination. Historians still argue about actual malnutrition rates and life expectancy among working women, as reliable health statistics remain nearly non-existent for this population. Official records focus on mortality rather than morbidity, creating incomplete pictures of the health consequences of chronic poverty and occupational hazards. The second joke emerges from bitter observation. Rats in London sewers enjoyed more reliable food sources and better housing security than many human residents, suggesting that urban planning prioritized waste management over human welfare. Seasonal variations dramatically affect survival prospects. Winter desperation drives prices down while increasing expenses for warmth and calories. Summer offers longer working hours and reduced heating costs, but brings different health challenges through poor sanitation and contaminated food supplies. Personal hygiene challenges multiply when public facilities remain scarce and private washing space non-existent. Mary performs daily maintenance with a basin of cold water, ration soap, and determination to maintain the appearance standards her profession demands. Tonight represents a small victory. 8 shillings earned means hot soup from Mrs. Kelly's kitchen, dry stockings purchased from a rag picker, and enough remaining coins for tomorrow's rent. The arithmetic balances, if barely, allowing another day's survival in a city that offers opportunities to those willing to seize them, regardless of respectability's opinions about the methods employed. Evening descends upon Regent Street like velvet curtains drawn across a grand theater, transforming the thoroughfare into London's most elegant marketplace of desire. Gas lamps cast golden halos over well-dressed crowds emerging from the Lyceum Theater, their silk top hats and rustling taffeta gowns creating a symphony of prosperity that echoes off marble facades and polished shop windows. Here, in the heart of London's West End, sex work operates under entirely different economic principles than the desperate transactions of Whitechapel. Catherine Morrison adjusts her borrowed pearl earrings and positions herself strategically outside the Reform Club, where gentlemen pause to light cigars and assess the evening's entertainment options. Her dress, rented from Mrs. Whitmore's establishment for 2 shillings nightly, rivals those worn by respectable ladies attending opera performances. The art of appearing respectable while advertising availability requires theatrical skills that would impress Drury Lane performers. A gloved hand adjusted just so against a lamppost, a lingering glance paired with the slightest smile, a fan open to display delicate wrist movements, each gesture calculated to attract the right attention while maintaining plausible respectability should awkward questions arise. Competition operates on multiple levels in this rarefied atmosphere. Street workers compete not only among themselves but against high-class brothel establishments whose madams dispatch elegantly dressed women to poach potential clients before independent operators can secure arrangements. The territorial disputes here involve silk gloves rather than bare knuckles, but the economic stakes prove equally fierce. A mainstream fact illuminates the dramatic economics. West End clients routinely paid 5 to 20 shillings for services that commanded only 6 pence to 2 shillings in East End locations. Geography determined income as definitively as postal codes determine property values, creating entirely different survival calculations for women working different districts. The support network includes doormen at gentlemen's clubs who expect discreet gratuity for blind eyes and helpful directions, cab drivers who facilitate introductions for percentage cuts, and theater staff who provide timing information about wealthy patrons' departure schedules. Everyone profits from the elegant commerce, creating webs of financial interdependence that extend far beyond the primary transactions. Seasonal patterns affect business with theatrical precision. Opera season brings wealthy visitors from the provinces and continent, their unfamiliarity with London creating opportunities for premium pricing. Summer doldrums see regular clients departing for country states, forcing women to either follow their clientele or accept reduced circumstances until autumn's social calendar resumes. The first joke emerges from professional observation. Competing with actual actresses for the best performances requires similar skills, but offers more reliable compensation, since theatrical reviews rarely determine whether one eats tomorrow. Police tolerance in wealthy districts operates through entirely different principles than East End enforcement. Constables here understand that discretion preserves the social order that justifies their salaries. Arrests might embarrass important men whose political connections extend to police commissioners and magistrates. The mathematics of law enforcement bend around wealth with predictable flexibility. Scandal risks create mutual vulnerabilities that smart women exploit for protection. Married gentlemen seeking discreet companionship face social and financial ruin if exposed, creating powerful incentives for generous treatment and repeat arrangements. Newspapers hunger for stories involving recognizable names, making anonymity valuable to both parties in these delicate negotiations. A quirky tidbit reveals a fashion economics. Some enterprising women rented evening gowns, jewelry, and accessories by the night from establishments serving actresses and opera singers. The costume rental fees, sometimes exceeding 2 shillings nightly, represented significant investments that could triple earning potential when properly deployed. Fashion maintenance costs consume substantial portions of West End profits. Regular laundry, cosmetic supplies, hairdressing, and clothing repairs required budgets that would support entire East End families. The second joke writes itself, spending more on costume than many legitimate actresses, while delivering performances that receive more enthusiastic audience response, though rarely public acknowledgement. The careful dance of discretion involves coded language sophisticated enough for diplomatic services. Seeking companionship for cultural activities might indicate interest in extended arrangements. Appreciating feminine conversation suggested specific service preferences. Valuing discretion above all qualities indicated married status and generous compensation for silence. Evening negotiations require reading subtle cues across class boundaries. A gentleman's hesitation might indicate budget concerns rather than disinterest. Excessive eagerness often suggested dangerous inexperience. The most profitable clients approach with confidence tempered by respect, understanding that they purchase not just physical services, but the illusion of genuine attraction from beautiful, accomplished women. Catherine's evening concludes successfully when Sir Reginald Pembroke, she recognizes him from society photographs, approaches with practiced discretion. Their arrangement, conducted through elegant euphemisms, secures her 15 shillings for an evening's companionship at his private club. The transaction validates her investment in appearance and location, proving that in London's economy of desire, presentation, and positioning determine profitability as surely as quality and service maintain repeat custom. Midnight settles over Whitechapel's narrow alleys like a predator claiming territory, transforming familiar streets into mazes where shadows conceal both opportunity and menace. The gas lamps here burn dimmer and farther apart than in the West End, creating pools of yellow light separated by stretches of darkness where anything might happen. Ellen Murphy pulls her thin shawl tighter and positions herself near the 10 Bells public house, where the sound of drunken laughter provides both cover and warning of potential clients. This represents a bottom tier of London's commercial sex trade, survival at any cost, where desperation meets desperation in transactions that strip away all pretense of romance or respectability. The clients here include dock workers spending their last shillings before payday, sailors on shore leave with foreign coins burning holes in their pockets, and desperate men whose circumstances mirror those of the women they seek. A mainstream fact cuts through the November fog. East End women often earn less than an entire week than their West End counterparts commanded for a single evening's work. Geography determined destiny with mathematical precision, creating entirely separate economic universes within the same city. While Catherine Morrison negotiated 15-shilling arrangements in Piccadilly, Ellen calculated survival in terms of sixpence transactions and penny calculations. Violence lurked as an occupational hazard more predictable than London weather. Desperate clients brought unpredictable behaviors. Men who had lost jobs, wives, or self-respect often sought to reclaim power through brutality against women they perceived as even more powerless than themselves. The confined spaces of East End alleys provided no escape routes when negotiations turned violent, and screams vanished into the general cacophony of a district where screaming was commonplace. Territorial disputes over prime corners created ongoing tensions that occasionally erupted into open warfare. The intersection near the dock gates, where workers received weekly wages, represented valuable commercial real estate that women defended through alliances, intimidation, and occasional violence. Regular customers became assets worth protecting, their loyalty purchased through consistent service and defended against competitors through whatever means proved necessary. Protection rackets operated with businesslike efficiency, as local thugs recognized profitable opportunities in women who couldn't report extortion to police. Mickey Sullivan demanded weekly tribute from all women working his self-declared territory, 2 shillings for protection that consisted mainly of protection from Mickey himself. The first joke emerged from bitter observation. Rats in the sewers showed more loyalty and reliability than some clients who promised regular arrangements, then disappeared when better options presented themselves. Gin shops served as informal headquarters and meeting places where information traveled faster than newspaper headlines. The Crown and Thistle maintained a backroom where women gathered between clients, sharing intelligence about violent men, generous spenders, and police patrol schedules. Mrs. Kellaway, the proprietress, allowed the gatherings in exchange for increased alcohol sales and tips about potential trouble that might affect her establishment. Historians still argue about actual crime rates versus media sensationalism in these districts, as newspapers discovered that East End violence sold papers, while West End discretion protected circulation among wealthy subscribers. Official statistics reflected police priorities and reporting patterns rather than actual assault frequencies, creating distorted pictures that served political purposes more than factual accuracy. The community of survival created bonds stronger than many family relationships. Women who competed fiercely for clients during working hours watched each other's backs when danger threatened. Martha Collins stationed herself at alley entrances to warn of approaching constables, while Rose McCarthy shared her laudanum when injuries made working impossible. These networks operated through necessity rather than sentiment, though genuine affection often developed through shared hardship. Medical risks multiplied without access to proper treatment or preventive care. Venereal diseases spread unchecked through populations who couldn't afford doctors and wouldn't trust them if they could. Self-treatment with mercury compounds, gin, and folk remedies often proved more dangerous than the original ailments. A quirky tidbit reveals desperate innovation. Some women carried decorative hatpins sharpened into weapons, disguised as fashionable accessories, while serving as last resort protection against violent clients. The workhouse threat loomed over every failed night, like a storm cloud on the horizon. 3 consecutive days without earning rent money meant facing the choice between literal starvation and institutional dehumanization. The second joke wrote itself with grim accuracy. Workhouse gruel might taste better than some client's company, though both left unpleasant aftertaste that lingered long after the experience ended. Seasonal desperation reached crescendos during winter months when heating costs increased while clients' disposable income decreased. November through February saw prices drop to survival levels as women competed for fewer customers with less money. Pneumonia, frostbite, and malnutrition claimed lives with bureaucratic regularity during these lean periods. Competition intensified as circumstances worsened. Women who might collaborate during prosperous times found themselves bidding against each other when clients became scarce. The mathematics of desperation recognized no friendship or loyalty. Survival trumped solidarity when children needed food or landlords demanded rent. Dawn breaks over Dorset Street like a weary witness to another night's struggles, revealing women counting meager coins and calculating whether today's earnings might cover tonight's necessities. Ellen manages 3 shillings, enough for lodging, bread, and a tot of gin to numb tomorrow's prospects. Survival for another night in London's most unforgiving district, where hope arrives in sixpenny installments and dignity becomes a luxury few can afford. Dawn breaks over the Thames like spilled tea, staining the water brown while fog lifts to reveal a forest of masts and rigging stretching along the London docks. The merchant vessel Aurora settles against the wharf with creaking timbers and shouted orders as 30 sailors prepare to taste London after 6 months at sea. Their pockets jingle with Spanish silver, Portuguese gold, and currencies that local money changers evaluate with suspicious precision. Maritime commerce creates its own economic rhythms that pulse through the docklands like tidal currents. When ships arrive, money flows freely as crews celebrate survival and shore leave. When vessels depart, the district settles into quieter poverty until the next arrival transforms temporary prosperity into brief reality. Women working these areas learn to read shipping schedules like farmers study weather patterns, both determining whether tomorrow brings feast or famine. International sailors introduce complications unknown in purely English transactions. Dutch merchants speak halting English mixed with maritime pidgin, while Spanish crews communicate through gestures and coins that sometimes prove counterfeit upon closer inspection. Language barriers create both opportunities and dangers. Misunderstandings might lead to generous overpayment or violent confrontations when expectations clash with reality. A mainstream fact emerges from the Port Authority statistics. Dock areas maintain prostitution rates 3 times higher than comparable inland districts. The mathematics reflected both opportunity and necessity. Sailors with accumulated wages meeting women, whose survival depended on maritime schedules and foreign currency exchange rates. The temporary nature of dock commerce creates unique business pressures. Crews remain in port for days or weeks only, creating intense but brief earning opportunities. Boarding house madams coordinate with ship agents to predict arrival schedules, positioning their best women to intercept sailors before competitors can establish contact. Mrs. O'Malley maintains detailed logs of shipping movements, crew sizes, and cargo values to predict which vessels will generate the most profitable shore leave business. Competition includes not only local women but foreign passengers, Spanish señoritas, French mademoiselles, and Dutch girls who arrive as unofficial crew members and work the docks with exotic appeal that commands premium pricing. The first joke emerges from professional observation. Sailors' stories grew taller than their ship's masts, but their purses proved disappointingly shallow once the storytelling ended and payment negotiations began. Quick turnover becomes essential when clients might sail with tomorrow's tide. Volume compensates for reduced per-transaction pricing, creating assembly line efficiency that maximizes earnings during brief windows of opportunity. Some women specialize in rapid encounters that accommodate multiple clients per evening, while others focus on overnight arrangements with officers who command larger budgets and private cabin accommodations. Port officials extract their percentages from every level of dock commerce. Customs officers demand bribes for ignoring contraband alcohol that lubricates negotiations, while harbor police collect weekly tribute for selective blindness regarding activities in warehouse districts after official hours. The corruption operates with mechanical precision, as predictable as tide tables and equally essential to port operations. A quirky tidbit reveals adaptive survival strategies. Some women learn basic phrases in Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, and German to facilitate business communications. How much? Come with me. And pay first, translated into multiple languages, became essential professional vocabulary for docklands commerce. The linguistic skills often prove more valuable than formal education, though rarely appeared on any census records. Seasonal shipping patterns create predictable income cycles throughout the year. Winter storms reduce arrivals, while summer trade brings steady business that allows women to accumulate savings for lean months. The East India Company's scheduled arrivals provide particularly profitable opportunities, as merchants returning from colonial ventures carry substantial coin and months of accumulated desires. Exotic payment methods reflect global trade connections. Sailors offer silk scarves from China, spice packets from India, or jewelry from Mediterranean ports in lieu of coin. Women develop expertise in appraising foreign goods, though converting exotic merchandise into rent money requires additional transactions with local dealers who extract their own percentages from every exchange. Medical risks multiply when intimate contact involves crews from ports worldwide. Diseases unknown to English physicians arrive with foreign ships, creating symptoms that local remedies cannot address. The second joke writes itself with bitter accuracy. Collecting international souvenirs often required mercury treatments more expensive than the original encounters, though the memories lasted considerably longer than the profits. Community networks operate with village-like intimacy despite the district's international character. Everyone knows which ships pay promptly, which crews cause trouble, and which captains allow shore leave extensions. Information travels through boarding houses, gin shops, and street corners faster than official maritime communications, creating unofficial intelligence networks that rival government shipping reports. The steamship Britannica sounds its departure whistle as morning fog lifts completely, revealing crews preparing for another ocean voyage. Women count coins earned during the past week's shore leave business, some celebrating profitable encounters, others calculating whether earnings will sustain them until the next ship's arrival. The temporary prosperity ends with the tide, leaving only the promise that another vessel will eventually bring another opportunity to transform maritime commerce into personal survival. Dock schedules determine daily rhythms as surely as factory bells, though the work here operates without foremen or time clocks. Only the eternal mathematics of supply, demand, and the tides that bring both ships and opportunities to London's bustling waterfront. Afternoon sunlight filters through London's perpetual haze as Petticoat Lane Market buzzes with the choreography of commerce, vendors hawking wares, customers haggling prices, and beneath it all, an invisible network of signals that would mystify casual observers while conducting business as efficiently as any telegraph system. To untrained eyes, the scene appears chaotic. To initiated participants, every gesture carries meaning as precise as printed advertisements. The evolution of silent communication systems reflects centuries of necessity meeting innovation. What began as simple warnings between women, a hand pressed a heart indicating danger, fingers spread showing police presence, developed into sophisticated vocabularies that encoded prices, services, client preferences, and territorial boundaries without speaking a single compromising word. These signals travel faster than gossip and prove more reliable than official notices. Hand positions convey complex information across crowded spaces. A woman adjusting her shawl with thumb and forefinger indicates availability for quick encounters. Two hands smoothing skirts suggests overnight arrangements possible. Touching the left earring warns of violent clients, while right earring contact signals generous spenders in the vicinity. Clothing arrangements add additional layers. Ribbons tied left indicate amateur status. Right suggests professional experience, while colors convey pricing tiers that change seasonally to avoid police detection. A mainstream fact emerges from police surveillance reports. Authorities estimated over 200 distinct coded signals operated across London by 1875, creating communication networks more complex than military field maneuvers. Officers spent considerable time attempting to decode these systems, though their understanding remained consistently several steps behind the evolving reality. Different districts developed specialized vocabularies suited to local conditions and clientele. West End signals emphasize discretion and class distinctions, with subtle fan positions indicating sophisticated services. East End codes prioritize speed and safety warnings, using rapid hand movements visible across narrow alleys. Docklands communications incorporated maritime flags and nautical gestures familiar to international sailors, while suburban areas adopted domestic signals that mimic household management behaviors. The apprenticeship system ensures knowledge transmission across generations. Veteran practitioners like Mrs. Sarah Webb take promising newcomers under protection, teaching not only survival techniques, but the intricate communication systems essential for success. These mentorships create bonds stronger than many family relationships, though they operate through practical necessity rather than sentiment. Newspaper advertisements employ coded language that appears respectable while conveying specific information to informed readers. Young lady seeks position in household, appreciating discretion, indicates availability for private arrangements. Accomplished woman desires employment with traveling gentlemen, suggests willingness to relocate for extended contracts. Refined companion available for cultural activities advertises high-class services to educated clientele. Window displays and chalk marks transform ordinary storefronts into message boards for those who understand the language. A flower pot position left of center indicates safe lodgings available, while right placement warns of police surveillance. Chalk marks on door frames, invisible to casual observers, provide intelligence about client behaviors, payment reliability, and territorial claims that prevent conflicts between competing women. A quirky tidbit illuminates the cultural cross-pollination. Some of the most sophisticated codes originated from Romani travelers and circus performers who brought communication systems developed for avoiding persecution and conducting business across language barriers. These techniques, adapted for urban sex work, proved remarkably effective for managing similar challenges in different environments. The first joke emerges from complexity comparisons. These women developed more comprehensive vocabularies and parliament employed for governing the empire, though their communications proved considerably more practical and infinitely more honest about their actual purposes and intended outcomes. Code security requires constant vigilance as police informants and rival operators attempt to penetrate communication networks. When authorities crack particular signals, new systems evolve within weeks, creating arms races between surveillance and secrecy that drive increasingly sophisticated innovations. Women who fail to adapt to system changes find themselves isolated from crucial intelligence about dangerous clients, police raids, and profitable opportunities. Cross-class communication involves servants carrying messages between mistresses and street-level operators, creating information bridges that span social divisions. Kitchen maids, stable boys, and shop clerks often serve as unwitting couriers, conveying coded messages they cannot decipher while connecting different levels of the underground economy. Historians still argue about how organized these networks actually were, whether they represented conscious conspiracies or organic adaptations to environmental pressures. Evidence suggests both elements: deliberate coordination in some areas, spontaneous evolution in others, creating hybrid systems that combine planning with improvisation as circumstances required. Shopkeepers and publicans play crucial roles as message centers and intelligence hubs. The proprietor of Murphy's Tobacco Shop maintains an informal postal system, accepting coded notes and delivering them to regular customers for small fees. His establishment operates as communications central for a 6-block radius, though he maintains plausible deniability about message contents through selective ignorance. Seasonal code changes prevent detection while adapting to changing business conditions. Winter signals emphasize indoor venues and heating costs, while summer communications focus on outdoor opportunities and extended daylight working hours. Holiday periods bring special vocabularies for managing increased police presence and tourist clientele unfamiliar with local customs. The second joke writes itself through linguistic absurdity. Navigating daily purchases required such extensive code knowledge that buying bread involved more complex communications than international diplomacy, though both activities shared certain fundamental dishonesty about their ultimate objectives. International variations reflect London's cosmopolitan character, as foreign women bring communication systems from their native countries. Italian gestures, French subtle glances, and Germanic positioning codes blend with English signals, creating hybrid languages that serve increasingly diverse populations working the city streets. Perfect silent communication unfolds as veteran practitioner Margaret Sullivan positions herself near a coffee house, while newcomer Jenny Walsh watches from across the street. Through precise hand movements, head tilts, and clothing adjustments, Margaret indicates a profitable client's approach, warns about constable presence, and negotiates territorial permissions, all without speaking a word. The arrangement succeeds perfectly. Client secured, authorities avoided, and business conducted with efficiency that would impress any commercial enterprise. The coded world operates with precision that official London rarely achieves, proving that necessity creates innovation more reliably than any government commission. Evening shadows lengthen across Soho's narrow streets as Constable William Morrison begins his regular beat, his brass-buttoned uniform gleaming under gas lamps that cast pools of yellow light on well-worn cobblestones. His route through Greek Street, Old Compton Street, and Wardour Street follows patterns as predictable as clockwork, timing calculated not for crime prevention, but for efficient collection of what he euphemistically terms voluntary contributions to police welfare. The informal economy of police corruption operates with business-like precision, creating parallel tax systems that generate more reliable revenue than official salaries. Morrison maintains detailed mental records of his weekly subscribers, women who pay regular tributes ranging from 6 pence to 5 shillings depending on their earning capacity and territorial value. These arrangements provide him with an additional 30 shillings weekly, nearly doubling his official police wage while ensuring his selective blindness regarding certain commercial activities. Enforcement varies dramatically based on geography and social class. West End policing emphasizes discretion and protection of reputation, with arrests carefully timed to avoid embarrassing influential clients. Morrison and his colleagues understand that scandals involving parliamentary members or prominent businessmen could end careers more swiftly than accusations of corruption. East End policing operates under different mathematics. Arrest quotas must be met, but the targets possess no political connections worth considering. The hierarchy within police ranks creates multiple levels of involvement in underground commerce. Beat constables like Morrison collect street-level tribute and provide immediate protection services. Detective inspectors coordinate larger operations, managing territorial disputes between competing madams and negotiating arrangements with established brothels. Superintendents maintain plausible deniability, while ensuring that monthly contributions reach appropriate levels to justify departmental tolerance. A mainstream fact emerges from Metropolitan Police annual reports. Over 15,000 arrests for solicitation occurred each year during the 1870s, yet conviction rates vary from 90% in working-class districts to less than 30% in wealthy areas. The mathematics reflected not judicial inconsistency, but careful calibration of enforcement to protect profitable arrangements while maintaining statistical appearances for parliamentary oversight. Some operations function as protection rackets disguised as law enforcement. Morrison's anti-vice patrols consist of warning regular contributors about plan raids while arresting non-paying competitors. The system eliminates business rivals while generating arrest statistics that satisfy supervisors demanding evidence of police activity against moral corruption. Individual constables demonstrate varying approaches to their informal revenue opportunities. Constable Henderson shows genuine concern for women's safety, using his position to warn about violent clients while accepting modest payments for information rather than protection. Constable Murphy operates purely as profit center, demanding maximum tribute while providing minimal service beyond basic non-interference with business operations. The first joke emerges from systematic observation. Police charity collections occur with greater regularity and reliability than church tithes, demonstrating more consistent devotion to financial obligations than most religious congregations manage toward their spiritual commitments. The notebook system creates bureaucratic facades for unofficial activities. Morrison records names, physical descriptions, and territorial assignments in official ledgers that appear to document vice suppression efforts, while actually managing client databases for tribute collection purposes. These records provide intelligence for optimizing revenue extraction, while creating paper trails that suggest legitimate police work to superior officers. Informant networks operate through carefully managed incentives, as women report on competitors, violent clients, and territorial violations in exchange for reduced tribute payments or preferential treatment during arrests. The system creates internal tensions within working communities while providing police with intelligence that maintains a control over underground commercial activities. A quirky tidbit reveals the seasonal nature of corruption. Some constables maintain Christmas lists of regular contributors, expecting bonus payments during holiday periods in exchange for reduced harassment during the year's most profitable working season. These arrangements formalize gift-giving traditions while ensuring continued cooperation between law enforcement and commerce. Raid timing follows predictable patterns designed for statistical rather than enforcement purposes. Most arrests occur during weekdays preceding magistrate court sessions, ensuring fresh defendants for judicial processing while allowing weekend business to operate with minimal interference. The schedule accommodates both police paperwork requirements and commercial revenue needs. The revolving door of arrest, fine, and release creates sustainable revenue streams for both police and courts. Morrison arrests the same women repeatedly, knowing that modest fines represent business expenses rather than deterrence. The system generates statistics demonstrating police effectiveness while maintaining steady income flows for all participants except the women paying multiple sets of fees. The second joke writes itself through judicial familiarity. Magistrates knew repeat defendants better than their own family members, creating informal social relationships based on professional cycling through legal procedures rather than genuine criminal justice processes. Higher-level corruption involves superintendents and local politicians who receive monthly percentages from district operations. Councilman Bradley ensures that local licensing decisions favor establishments contributing to police welfare funds, while Superintendent Davies coordinates with multiple districts to prevent territorial conflicts that might attract unwanted attention from reform-minded officials or newspaper investigations. Morrison concludes his evening patrol with pockets containing an additional 12 shillings in tribute payments, warnings delivered to 6 regular contributors about planned weekend raids, and 3 strategic arrests of non-paying competitors who challenged established territorial arrangements. His notebook documents efficient police work combating moral corruption, while his actual activities maintain profitable stability within carefully managed commercial districts. The mathematics work perfectly. Crime statistics satisfy supervisors, tribute payments supplement inadequate official salaries, and underground commerce operates with predictable security that benefits everyone except taxpayers who believe their police force prioritizes law enforcement over revenue generation. Morrison's conscience weighs approximately 12 shillings lighter than his pockets as he reports for duty completion. Another successful evening of selective law enforcement concluded with professional satisfaction. Morning light filters through grimy windows of the Royal Portsmouth Hospital as 24 women stand in silent queue outside the examination ward, their faces bearing expressions of resignation mixed with barely contained terror. The Contagious Diseases Acts of 1864, 1866, and 1869 have transformed medical care into state-sanctioned violation, creating apparatus of control disguised as public health measures. Mary Fletcher clutches her shawl tighter as the line moves forward with mechanical inevitability. At 19, she faces her 3rd compulsory examination, invasive procedures conducted without consent, explanation, or dignity. The acts initially targeted garrison towns and naval ports, supposedly protecting military personnel from venereal disease, but expanded steadily to encompass any district where authorities deemed moral regulation necessary. Women's resistance networks operate through whispered intelligence shared in lodging houses and market squares. Warning systems alert potential targets when inspection officers patrol specific areas. Some women develop hiding strategies, temporary relocations to districts outside Act jurisdiction, false identity documentation, or strategic illnesses that postpone examinations until circumstances improve. The Underground Railroad of resistance creates bonds stronger than family relationships, forged through shared vulnerability to state power. A mainstream fact cuts through morning fog like a blade. Between 1864 and 1886, over 110,000 women underwent compulsory examination under the Acts. The statistics represent more than bureaucratic efficiency. They document systematic violation of working-class women's bodies in service of military health and middle-class moral anxieties. The medical apparatus of control operates with scientific precision applied to moral purposes. Speculum examinations, conducted by male physicians who regard their subjects as specimens rather than patients, determine health status through procedures designed for maximum humiliation. Mercury treatments, administered regardless of actual infection, poison women while claiming to cure them. The irony writes itself. Treatments often prove more dangerous than the diseases they supposedly addressed. False accusations flourish under legislation that permits detention based on mere suspicion of prostitution. Any woman walking alone after dark, speaking to unknown men, or displaying independence that threatens conventional morality faces potential arrest and examination. Police constables, magistrates, and medical officers wield power that transforms suspicion into legal fact through administrative processes that bypass normal judicial protections. Class bias operates with mathematical precision throughout the system. Working-class women, servants, factory workers, seamstresses, face regular harassment and examination, while middle-class women engaging in identical behaviors remain mysteriously invisible to enforcement efforts. The acts protect respectable society by targeting those least capable of political resistance, while ignoring moral transgressions among those with social connections and economic resources. Historians still argue about whether disease rates actually decreased under the acts, as medical record-keeping remained inconsistent and politically motivated. Some evidence suggests infection rates dropped in military populations, though civilian statistics remain unreliable. Critics noted that disease reduction might reflect improved sanitation and medical knowledge, rather than compulsory examination programs, making causation impossible to establish definitively. The first joke emerges from administrative absurdity. Medical certificates of health lasted longer than many of the marriages they were meant to protect, creating situations where official documentation of moral purity outlived actual relationships by months or years. Hospital detention systems operate as prisons disguised as medical facilities. Women diagnosed with infections face weeks or months of forced treatment, confined in wards that strip away personal autonomy while administering mercury compounds that often cause more suffering than the original ailments. The detention periods destroy earning capacity precisely when medical expenses require income, creating economic disasters that compound health crises. Underground resistance develops sophisticated techniques for circumventing official control. Forged certificates circulate through networks of sympathetic clerks and corrupt officials. Bribery secures favorable examination results or delayed processing. False identities allow women to avoid registration systems designed to track their movements and activities across district boundaries. A quirky tidbit reveals creative adaptation. Some women learn to forge official stamps using potato cuts carved into appropriate shapes and lampblack mixed with oil to create convincing reproductions of government seals. The technique, borrowed from radical printing operations, proved remarkably effective for creating documentation that satisfied casual inspection by harried officials. The repeal campaign gains momentum when middle-class feminists finally recognized that state power deployed against working-class women could eventually target their own daughters and wives. Josephine Butler's Ladies National Association mobilizes respectability politics in service of civil liberties, creating unlikely alliances between moral reformers and those they previously sought to control. International comparisons reveal similar systems operating throughout British military colonies, where garrison health took precedence over local women's rights. India, Gibraltar, Malta, and Hong Kong implemented parallel legislation that reflected imperial priorities while demonstrating metropolitan indifference to colonial population civil liberties. The second joke writes itself through military irony. Medical examinations proved more thorough and invasive than most military inspections, suggesting that authorities devoted greater attention to controlling women's bodies than maintaining combat readiness among actual soldiers. Psychological trauma extends far beyond physical violation, creating lasting damage that medical reports never acknowledge. Women describe nightmares, panic attacks when approached by uniformed officials, and persistent fear of arbitrary detention that transforms daily life into constant vigilance. The acts succeed in terrorizing their targets while failing to achieve their stated public health objectives. Sarah Williams stands at the examination room door, having watched 24 women emerge with faces bearing expressions of violation and shame. She calculates her options: submit to degrading procedures that brand her as officially fallen, or resist and face imprisonment that destroys any hope of maintaining legitimate employment. Her decision will determine not only her immediate fate, but her relationship with state power that claims moral authority while exercising physical control over women's bodies. The queue moves forward with inexorable momentum, each step bringing another woman closer to procedures that transform citizenship into subjugation, medical care into punishment, and public health into private violation. The acts continue their work of social control, one examination at a time, until political resistance finally matches the courage of women who refuse to accept that their bodies belong to state authority rather than themselves. Afternoon light struggles through barred windows of the London Lock Hospital, casting iron shadows across corridors that smell of carbolic acid, mercury compounds, and barely contain despair. The institution represents Victorian medicine at its most systematic and brutal. Specialized facilities designed for enforced treatment that prioritizes social control over patient welfare. White-coated attendants move with administrative efficiency through wards where healing takes second place to punishment disguised as public health policy. The daily routine strips away human dignity with mechanical precision. Detained women wake at 6 to bells that echo through sterile hallways, submit to morning inspections that catalog symptoms and resistance, consume porridge thin enough to qualify as punishment, then endure medical procedures administered without explanation or consent. Regulations govern every aspect of existence. When to speak, where to walk, how to hold eating utensils during supervised meals that taste of institutional indifference. Mercury treatment protocols transform healing into systematic poisoning. Patients receive regular doses of mercurous chloride regardless of actual symptoms or infection status, causing tooth loss, kidney damage, and neurological tremors that physicians record as evidence of treatment effectiveness rather than toxic side effects. The first joke emerges from medical logic. Hospital cures prove consistently worse than the diseases they supposedly treated, suggesting that doctors confuse symptom creation with therapeutic progress. A mainstream fact cuts through the antiseptic atmosphere like a scalpel. Lock hospitals maintain mortality rates 40% higher than general hospitals, reflecting both the severity of untreated conditions and the lethal consequences of mercury-based treatments. The statistics document institutional failure disguised as medical innovation, creating death rates that would scandalize modern healthcare while generating Victorian pride in scientific advancement. Medical staff display attitudes ranging from genuine sympathy to clinical indifference. Nurse Patterson shows maternal concern for younger patients, sharing extra food and offering comfort during painful procedures. Dr. Whitmore, however, regards his charges as specimens rather than patients, conducting examinations with detached curiosity that treats human suffering as intellectual puzzle rather than ethical obligation. The institutional culture rewards professional distance while discouraging emotional engagement with patient welfare. Record-keeping achieves obsessive thoroughness in documenting women's bodies, sexual histories, and moral failings while ignoring their humanity. Medical charts detail physical examinations with scientific precision, noting breast development, genital abnormalities, and scarring patterns that physicians interpret as evidence of moral corruption rather than survival necessity. These documents create permanent archives of violation that follow patients long after discharge. Class distinctions operate even within institutional confinement. Paying patients occupy private rooms with better food and reduced treatment intensity, while compulsory cases share overcrowded wards where medical procedures serve punishment purposes as much as therapeutic goals. The hospital maintains separate entrances, dining areas, and visiting privileges that reflect social hierarchies even among society's condemned women. Religious instruction forms mandatory components of moral treatment that assume spiritual corruption underlies physical disease. Daily chapel attendance exposes patients to sermons about sin and redemption, while medical staff monitor responses for signs of appropriate penitence. The chaplain's visits combine theological examination with moral surveillance that reports resistance to institutional authority. A quirky tidbit reveals economic exploitation disguised as therapeutic activity. Hospital laundries operated entirely through detained women's unpaid labor, generating profits that help fund institutional operations while providing useful occupation for patients too sick for other assignments. The system created dependency relationships that extended detention periods while reducing operational costs. Visiting restrictions isolate patients from family support networks that might provide emotional comfort or legal assistance. Letters undergo censorship that removes criticism of hospital conditions while allowing approved moral encouragement. Families may visit only during specified hours under staff supervision that monitors conversations for seditious content or escape planning. The discharge system operates through administrative discretion rather than medical criteria. Certificates of health require demonstrated moral improvement as much as physical recovery, creating subjective standards that extend attention for rebellious patients regardless of their actual condition. Some women remain confined for months after medical treatment concludes, awaiting evidence of sufficient spiritual transformation. Escape attempts face severe consequences, including extended detention, reduced privileges, and transfer to more restrictive facilities. The hospital's location and design minimize such possibilities through high walls, barred windows, and staff vigilance that treats patient autonomy as security threat rather than civil right. Alternative treatments become necessary when institutional medicine fails or proves intolerable. Women seek folk remedies from sympathetic staff, purchase black market medications with smuggled coins, or attempt self-treatment using whatever substances prove available. These desperate measures often create additional health problems while demonstrating patient agency within oppressive systems. Historians still argue about whether lock hospitals provided genuine medical benefit or functioned primarily as social control mechanisms that used health rhetoric to justify moral regulation. Evidence suggests both elements operated simultaneously, though social control objectives often overrode medical considerations when institutional priorities conflicted. The economics of detention remained deliberately opaque, with costs distributed among government agencies, charitable organizations, and patient families according to formulas that maximize revenue while minimizing accountability. Hospital administrators become expert at bureaucratic cost shifting that generates profits from human misery. The second joke writes itself through professional observation. Doctors working in lock hospitals learn more about bureaucratic procedures and medical science, developing expertise in paperwork management that exceeded their knowledge of disease treatment or patient care. Mercury poisoning creates long-term health consequences that extend far beyond hospital discharge. Neurological damage, kidney failure, and dental destruction mark former patients permanently, creating disabilities that compound social stigma with physical incapacity. Many women emerge from treatment sicker than when they entered, bearing institutional scars alongside their original ailments. Eleanor Matthews walks through the hospital gates carrying discharge papers that certify her physical health while documenting her moral fall. The mercury treatments have left her with trembling hands and missing teeth, permanent reminders of state medicine applied to female bodies deemed dangerous to social order. She faces a world that will judge her not by her survival of institutional brutality, but by her presence in records that mark her forever as officially fallen. The lock hospital system has accomplished its true purpose, not healing disease, but creating permanent categories of degraded womanhood that justify continued social control. The magistrate's court at Marlborough Street buzzes with morning business as 23 women await summary justice dispensed by men who have never experienced the economic pressures that drive female desperation. Magistrate Pemberton adjusts his wire spectacles and consults the day's docket with bureaucratic efficiency, preparing to process cases that generate more revenue than genuine crime prevention. The legal system's gender bias operates with mathematical precision. Male magistrates, male constables, male lawyers, and male clerks administering justice to women whose voices remain systematically excluded from proceedings that determine their fates. Summary convictions proceed without meaningful defense representation, as court-appointed advocates spend more time reviewing paperwork than consulting clients. Most women cannot afford private lawyers, while legal aid remains a future concept rather than present reality. The average hearing lasts 3 minutes, barely sufficient time for reading charges, much less mounting coherent defense strategies. Fine structures ensure repeat offenses rather than deterring criminal behavior, creating sustainable revenue streams for courts, police, and local government. A mainstream fact cuts through legal pretense like a knife. Average fines reach 10 shillings when many women's weekly earnings totaled less than 5 shillings. The mathematics guarantee return appearances that generate continued income while maintaining imprisonment threats for non-payment. Josephine Butler's Ladies National Association mobilizes middle-class respectability in service of working-class civil liberties, creating unlikely political alliances that challenge state power through moral authority rather than direct confrontation. Butler's speeches draw crowds and include both radical feminists and conservative Christians united in opposition to government regulation of personal morality, though their motivations and ultimate objectives remain distinctly different. Working-class women develop their own resistance strategies that operate independently of organized reform movements. Court disruptions, coordinated through lodging house networks, overwhelm administrative systems with simultaneous appearances that create processing bottlenecks. False names confuse record-keeping systems that depend on accurate identification for tracking repeat offenders. Some women memorize elaborate fictional biographies that contradict previous testimony, creating administrative chaos that frustrates efficient case processing. Legal loopholes occasionally work in defendants' favor when technicalities override prosecutorial convenience. incorrectly completed paperwork, jurisdictional disputes between competing police districts, and witness scheduling conflicts sometimes result in dismissed charges that provide temporary relief from systematic harassment. International attention focuses unwelcome scrutiny on British moral regulation policies that contradict the nation's self-image as beacon of civilization and human rights. European critics note the hypocrisy of condemning foreign despotism while implementing domestic policies that violate basic civil liberties. French newspapers particularly enjoy highlighting English moral legislation that exceeds continental authoritarianism in scope and severity. A quirky tidbit reveals creative adaptation. Some women memorize multiple fake life stories, complete with fictional family histories, employment records, and residential addresses, rotating these identities to confuse court records and avoid identification as repeat offenders. The practice required considerable memory skills that demonstrated intellectual capabilities rarely acknowledged in official proceedings. The first joke emerges from judicial familiarity. Magistrates knew court regulars better than their own clerks, developing informal relationships with repeat defendants that sometimes generated more warmth than existed in their official family interactions. Parliamentary debates reveal political maneuvering that prioritizes party advantage over policy effectiveness. Conservative members support the acts to demonstrate moral leadership, while liberal opponents attack them to embarrass the government, with actual concern for affected women remaining secondary to broader political calculations. The legislation becomes ammunition in larger battles over state power and individual liberty, rather than genuine attempts to address public health concerns. The alliance between middle-class feminists and civil libertarians creates temporary cooperation between groups that disagree on most other issues. John Stuart Mill's philosophical opposition to state interference in private behavior aligns with feminist concerns about gender-specific legislation, producing political coalitions that transcend normal ideological boundaries while remaining fragile and issue-specific. Press coverage divides between sensational reporting that exploits moral panic for circulation purposes and serious reform journalism that documents systematic abuses, requiring legislative correction. The Times publishes detailed investigations of hospital conditions, while penny papers emphasize scandal and titillation that increases sales without advancing policy debates. Historians still argue about whether organized legal resistance actually helped individual women or primarily served middle-class reform agendas that sacrifice immediate welfare for long-term political objectives. Evidence suggests mixed results. Publicity campaigns raise awareness while potentially increasing enforcement severity against working-class targets. The repeal campaign employs diverse tactics, including petition drives that gather 250,000 signatures, public demonstrations that challenge gender conventions about women's political participation, and parliamentary lobbying that applies sustained pressure on vulnerable constituencies. International speakers like Josephine Butler's European allies provide moral authority that transcends domestic political divisions. Local variations in enforcement and judicial interpretation create geographic inconsistencies that women learn to exploit through strategic relocation and forum shopping. Lenient magistrates attract defendants from neighboring districts, while harsh judges face declining caseloads as word spreads through informal networks about sentencing patterns. The second joke writes itself through professional observation. Lawyers made more money from the acts than anyone else, generating fees from both prosecution and defense while ensuring continued litigation through deliberately complex procedures that maximize billable hours. Public opinion shifts gradually throughout the 1870s and 1880s, as reform campaigns generate sustained criticism of policies that increasingly appear arbitrary and ineffective. Middle-class support erodes when enforcement occasionally threatens respectable women, while working-class resistance demonstrates that targets possessed agency and political consciousness rather than passive victimhood. The 1886 repeal represents political victory achieved through sustained organization and strategic alliance building, though enforcement patterns continue informally through police discretion and judicial interpretation. Legal battles end, but practical resistance continues as women navigate systems that maintain unofficial discrimination despite official policy changes. Annie Morrison stands outside Marlborough Street Court holding dismissal papers that represent temporary victory in ongoing war between state authority and personal autonomy. The acts may be repealed, but the assumptions underlying them, that women's bodies belong to public regulation rather than private control, persistent enforcement practices that continue informal discrimination long after formal legislation disappears. Legal victory proves incomplete when social attitudes remain unchanged, requiring continued resistance against systems that adapt rather than abandoning their fundamental objectives. Twilight settles over the imposing facade of St. Margaret's Home for Penitent Women, its Gothic revival architecture declaring moral purpose through every pointed arch and carved stone angel. 27 women queue outside wrought iron gates, their faces reflecting mixtures of desperation and fading hope as they clutch reference letters from clergymen, charity workers, or magistrates who promise salvation through institutional rehabilitation. The building's design speaks volumes about Victorian reform philosophy: high walls topped with iron spikes, barred windows that admit light while preventing escape, and moral symbolism embedded in every brick and buttress. The architecture of reform operates through psychological intimidation, disguised as Christian charity. Stone tablets carved with biblical verses about redemption loom above the entrance, while stained glass windows depict Mary Magdalene in poses of appropriate penitence. The message requires no verbal explanation. Salvation demands submission to institutional authority that brooks no questioning of methods or objectives. Intake procedures transform compassionate rhetoric into moral interrogation that strips away remaining dignity along with personal possessions. Matron Henderson conducts interviews designed to establish degrees of fallen status, asking intimate questions about sexual history, family background, and previous employment that serve classification rather than therapeutic purposes. Each woman must confess specific sins before admission, providing institutional ammunition for future moral leverage. Daily routines eliminate personal autonomy through schedules that prioritize institutional control over individual needs. 5:30 morning bells summon inmates to mandatory prayers that last 45 minutes regardless of religious conviction. Breakfast consists of thin porridge consumed in silence, while matrons read moral lectures about redemption through suffering. Work assignments begin at 7. Unpaid laundry labor that funds institutional operations while providing useful occupation for hands that might otherwise engage in sinful activities. A mainstream fact cuts through charitable pretense. By 1885, London housed over 50 rescue institutions accommodating more than 3,000 women annually. The statistics document the scale of middle-class intervention in working-class morality, creating institutional networks that process female deviance with industrial efficiency while generating profits from moral regulation disguised as Christian charity. The economics of rescue operate through exploited labor that transforms good intentions into profitable enterprises. Women wash, iron, and men clothe for wealthy customers who appreciate the symbolic value of garments cleaned by reformed Magdalens. The institutions collect full commercial rates while providing workers only food, shelter, and moral instruction, creating profit margins that would embarrass legitimate businesses operating under honest labor practices. Success stories circulated through charitable publications contrast sharply with institutional realities that see most women departing within months of arrival. Official statistics emphasize dramatic conversions and permanent reformations, while ignoring revolving door patterns that bring the same individuals through multiple institutions seeking temporary shelter rather than spiritual transformation. Class dynamics permeate every aspect of institutional life, as middle-class ladies manage working-class women through moral superiority backed by economic control. Board members visit weekly to inspect progress and dispense patronizing encouragement that reinforces social hierarchies, while providing donors with satisfying evidence of their charitable effectiveness. A quirky tidbit reveals the systematic nature of institutional classification. Some homes required women to wear uniforms color-coded by their perceived degree of fall: white for recent arrivals, gray for probationary cases, and brown for those deemed most morally degraded. The system created visible hierarchies that encouraged competition for advancement while maintaining administrative control through public humiliation. The first joke emerges from institutional logic. Moral improvement was measured by laundry whiteness, suggesting that spiritual purification could be quantified through textile bleaching techniques that impressed donors more than they transformed souls. Constant moral surveillance creates psychological pressure that extends beyond scheduled activities, into private thoughts and personal relationships. Staff monitor conversations, read personal letters, and evaluate behavioral compliance through standards that change according to institutional convenience rather than consistent moral principles. The omnipresent scrutiny generates paranoia and performance anxiety that often proves more damaging than the original circumstances that brought women to seek help. Relationships between inmates develop through necessity and genuine affection despite institutional efforts to prevent solidarity that might challenge administrative authority. Mary Sullivan and Catherine Walsh share whispered conversations about life beyond institutional walls while providing mutual support during particularly harsh treatment. Their friendship transcends the competitive dynamics that institutions deliberately foster to maintain control. Staff attitudes vary dramatically between genuine reformers who show authentic concern for individual welfare and sanctimonious controllers who use moral authority to exercise petty tyrannies over vulnerable populations. Miss Thornton demonstrates maternal care that acknowledges women's humanity, while Mrs. Blackwood employs religious rhetoric to justify arbitrary punishments that satisfy her need for power over those she perceives as moral inferiors. Historians still argue about whether rescue homes provided genuine assistance or functioned as elaborate punishment systems that use charitable rhetoric to justify social control. Evidence suggests both elements operated simultaneously, though institutional needs for funding and public approval often overrode individual welfare when conflict arose between charitable image and effective treatment. The outside world perceives rescue institutions as unquestionably beneficial charitable enterprises that deserve financial support and moral praise, while actual participants experience them as controlling environments that exchange temporary shelter for personal autonomy and dignity. The gap between public reception and private reality enables continued operations that serve donor satisfaction more than recipient welfare. Alternative networks of women helping women operate without institutional overhead or moral supervision, providing practical assistance based on mutual understanding rather than condescending charity. These informal systems often prove more effective than official programs precisely because they respect individual agency while addressing immediate needs. The second joke writes itself through institutional priorities. Prayers occurred more regularly than meals, suggesting that spiritual nourishment received greater attention than physical sustenance in institutions supposedly devoted to comprehensive human welfare. Graduation ceremonies provide public validation for institutional success, while creating artificial milestones that ignore long-term outcomes. Women receive certificates of moral improvement that satisfy donors' need for tangible evidence of charitable effectiveness, while providing graduates with documentation of stigmatized institutional association that follows them into future employment searches. Elizabeth Porter stands at the institution gates after 3 months of moral rehabilitation that taught her more about institutional manipulation than personal redemption. She clutches her certificate of improvement while calculating survival prospects in a world that offers limited alternatives to the life she briefly attempted to escape. Her decision to leave despite having nowhere specific to go represents a choice between authentic autonomy and manufactured respectability that ultimately values institutional control over individual agency. The rescue home system continues its work of processing female deviance through moral machinery that satisfies middle-class charitable impulses, while creating sustainable revenue streams from exploited labor disguised as spiritual rehabilitation. The architecture reform stands solid against the twilight sky, its Gothic towers reaching toward heaven, while its foundations rest firmly on the profitable transformation of human desperation into institutional success statistics. Night descends over Commercial Street as the London City Mission deploys its weekly assault on moral darkness, armed with steaming soup kettles and evangelical determination. Sister Catherine MacLeod adjusts her black bonnet and surveys the gathering crowd of women, who have learned that religious instruction comes attached to every ladle of barley broth. The mission operates with military precision, saving souls and preserving social order through coordinated campaigns that treat spiritual warfare as literal combat against forces threatening Christian civilization. Evangelical fervor drives rescue work with intensity that burns brighter than the gas lamps illuminating this improvised outdoor chapel. Missionaries believe they battle Satan himself for control of women's souls. viewing commercial sex work as demonic recruitment that threatens not only individual salvation, but the moral foundations of British society. Their tactics combine material aid with spiritual pressure, creating dependency relationships that leverage hunger against conscience in negotiations that would embarrass commercial loan sharks. The gender politics prove particularly complex as female reformers use religious authority to justify entering public spaces traditionally dominated by male ministers and civic officials. Women like Sister MacLeod gain unprecedented social mobility through missionary work that transforms domestic piety into public activism, though always within carefully defined boundaries that maintain ultimate male authority over religious doctrine and institutional direction. A mainstream fact illuminates the scale of organized intervention. The London City Mission employed over 400 missionaries by 1880, with significant portions focused specifically on fallen women as priority targets for conversion efforts that combined individual salvation with broader social control objectives. The statistics represent massive investment in moral regulation disguised as charitable activity. Cultural imperialism operates through systematic imposition of middle-class values on working-class survival strategies that missionaries refuse to understand as rational responses to economic circumstances. They interpret poverty as moral failing, while prescribing spiritual solutions for material problems, creating therapeutic approaches that ignore structural causes while blaming individuals for systematic failures. Pamphlet wars flood the streets with competing moral messages as different denominations, charitable organizations, and reform societies battle for influence over targeted populations. The Salvation Army distributes thousands of leaflets promising earthly assistance alongside heavenly rewards, while the Church of England maintains more dignified literature emphasizing traditional authority structures. Methodist missions offer emotional testimonials from converted Magdalens, creating propaganda battles that overwhelm already confused women with contradictory advice. International connections spread British missionary methods throughout the empire and beyond, exporting moral regulation techniques to colonial territories where they intersect with existing cultural systems to create hybrid forms of social control. Indian missions adopt London strategies while adapting them to local conditions, creating global networks of moral intervention that standardize approaches to female sexuality across diverse cultural contexts. A quirky tidbit reveals adaptive strategies that horrified supervisors. Some missionaries learned street slang and criminal argot to communicate more effectively with targeted populations, mastering vocabularies that enabled them to understand working-class concerns while providing their organizations with intelligence about underground economic activities. The first joke emerges from linguistic complexity. Missionaries often spoke more languages than career diplomats, mastering not only foreign tongues for international work, but multiple class dialects within English society that enabled them to navigate social boundaries with remarkable fluency. The economics of charity create complex financial networks as donations flow from wealthy supporters to street-level operations through organizational hierarchies that extract administrative costs at every level. Middle-class donors contribute to institutional overhead, while working-class volunteers provide unpaid labor that keeps missions operational, creating economic relationships that mirror the broader social inequalities missionaries claim to address. Resistance from targeted women takes multiple forms, including open mockery of missionary pretensions, strategic avoidance of known reform agents, and deliberate subversion of religious messages through parody and irreverent humor that deflates evangelical pomposity. Some women develop elaborate performances of spiritual conversion that satisfy missionary requirements while maintaining personal autonomy through private skepticism. Genuine conversions do occur, though they remain difficult to distinguish from strategic compliance designed to access material benefits without accepting spiritual supervision. The line between authentic religious transformation and tactical accommodation blurs when survival depends on satisfying missionary expectations while maintaining income sources they consider sinful. Historians still argue about whether missionary work provided net benefits through practical assistance and emotional support or caused cultural damage by destroying adaptive survival strategies, while imposing inappropriate moral frameworks on complex social problems requiring economic rather than spiritual solutions. Reformed women employed as missionaries create authenticity problems, as their personal experiences provide credibility, while their institutional roles require them to condemn behaviors they once practiced. These female agents navigate difficult positions between genuine empathy and organizational demands that sometimes require them to betray women seeking help through programs that promise confidentiality but deliver moral surveillance. Competition between religious denominations for rescue territory creates territorial disputes that mirror commercial business practices as different organizations claim exclusive rights to work specific neighborhoods or client populations. The second joke writes itself through commercial parallels. Charitable societies competed like street vendors, hawking salvation with the same aggressive marketing techniques used to sell patent medicines and miracle cures. Unintended consequences include strengthening underground networks through shared opposition to missionary intervention, as women who might otherwise compete for clients unite in resistance to outside moral authority that threatens their economic independence. The missions inadvertently create solidarity among targeted populations who develop collective strategies for managing religious pressure while maintaining their chosen professions. Competition escalates when multiple denominations work the same district simultaneously, leading to theological disputes conducted through proxy battles over individual converts who become prizes in larger religious wars rather than human beings deserving assistance on their own terms. Dawn breaks over Commercial Street as Sister McLeod counts the evening's results. 17 conversions claimed, 43 soup portions distributed, and dozens of pamphlets dispersed into hands that may or may not read them. The mission continues its work of moral transformation through methods that satisfy donors' charitable impulses, while creating sustainable employment for middle-class reformers who profit from the systematic regulation of working-class morality. The cycle begins anew with each sunrise, bringing fresh opportunities for spiritual warfare that treats human desperation as battlefield terrain in cosmic struggles between good and evil that conveniently align with existing social hierarchies and economic arrangements. The moral crusades march onward, armed with soup ladles and righteous certainty, into another day of saving souls whether they want salvation or simply need a meal. Morning sunlight filters through tall windows of the London Society for the Rescue of Young Women and Children, illuminating polished mahogany tables where 12 earnest reformers plan their next assault on moral darkness. Chairman Reverend Pemberton adjusts his spectacles and consults ledgers documenting another year of charitable triumph. Hundreds of Magdalens rescued, dozens of institutions expanded, thousands of pounds raised from sympathetic donors who believe their contributions purchase genuine social transformation rather than institutional sustainability. The gap between reformers' noble intentions and actual outcomes for targeted women operates like parallel universes that never intersect despite occupying identical geographic space. Board members speak eloquently about spiritual redemption, while avoiding uncomfortable questions about recidivism rates that would embarrass commercial enterprises claiming similar failure percentages as evidence of success. Statistical manipulation reaches artistic levels as organizations count rescues through intake numbers while avoiding systematic follow-up studies that might reveal inconvenient truths about long-term outcomes. Each woman entering institutional care generates celebration and publicity, regardless of whether she remained beyond the first week, creating accounting methods that measure institutional activity rather than individual transformation. The revolving door effect sees familiar faces cycling through multiple institutions as the same women seek temporary shelter, food, and medical care from different organizations that compete for credit while failing to provide sustainable alternatives to the economic circumstances that created initial desperation. Maria Santos appears in 5 separate institutional success stories within 18 months, each claiming to have achieved her permanent reformation. A mainstream fact cuts through charitable rhetoric like cold steel. Independent follow-up studies revealed that over 70% of rescued women returned to street work within 12 months of institutional discharge. The statistics document systematic failure disguised as moral victory, creating evidence that reformers systematically ignored while continuing identical methods that produced identical disappointing results. Economic realities that reformers refused to acknowledge included wage structures that paid women 30 to 40% less than men for comparable work, housing costs that consumed 60% of legitimate earnings, and childcare expenses that made conventional employment impossible for mothers without family support. The moral framework prevented practical analysis of structural problems requiring economic rather than spiritual solutions. Success becomes defined by institutional needs rather than women's actual well-being, creating measurement systems that prioritize fundraising requirements over therapeutic outcomes. Organizations needed dramatic conversion stories for donor cultivation, leading to emphasis on spectacular individual cases rather than systematic approaches that might produce less sensational but more sustainable results. A quirky tidbit reveals competitive dynamics that contradicted charitable cooperation. Some reform societies competed for the most fallen cases, believing that rescuing women with particularly dramatic histories of degradation would generate more impressive testimonials for fundraising purposes and public relations campaigns. The first joke emerges from institutional priorities. Reform proved easier to measure than accomplish, as organizations developed sophisticated accounting methods for tracking inputs while avoiding systematic evaluation of outputs that might require acknowledging fundamental approach failures. The professionalization of charity created career opportunities for middle-class reformers who developed vested interests in maintaining problems that justified their employment, leading to conflicts between effective solutions that would eliminate positions and sustainable approaches that ensure continued institutional relevance and individual advancement. Government subsidies flowed to institutions with impressive statistical presentations rather than demonstrated effectiveness, creating perverse incentives that rewarded organizations skilled at bureaucratic manipulation more than those achieving genuine therapeutic outcomes. Treasury officials measured charitable efficiency through paperwork compliance rather than social impact assessment. International comparisons revealed similar failure patterns across different countries, suggesting that underlying approaches rather than specific cultural contexts produced disappointing results. French rescue institutions, German Magdalene homes, and American moral reform societies all documented identical patterns of initial enthusiasm followed by long-term recidivism that organizations learned to disguise rather than address. Historians still argue about whether any Victorian reform movement genuinely helped targeted populations or whether all primarily served other purposes, including middle-class employment creation, social control maintenance, and donor satisfaction that had little relationship to stated charitable objectives. The voices of women themselves remain systematically excluded from policy discussions, program design, and effectiveness evaluation, creating intervention systems that operated without input from those supposedly being helped. When women's perspectives appeared in institutional records, they were carefully edited to conform to expected narratives of gratitude and transformation. Alternative approaches that might have produced better outcomes included direct economic support without moral conditions, legal protection from violence and exploitation, accessible health care that addressed immediate needs, and vocational training that led to genuinely sustainable employment rather than domestic service positions that recreated dependency relationships. The persistence of moral frameworks despite repeated practical failures demonstrated ideological commitment that transcended empirical evidence, as reformers continued identical methods while expecting different results through increased effort rather than strategic reconsideration. The second joke wrote itself through good intentions that paved roads leading nowhere useful, as charitable energy created elaborate institutional structures that served everyone except the women they claimed to help. Media coverage consistently emphasized sensational rescue stories rather than boring policy solutions that might address structural causes, creating public understanding based on individual drama rather than systematic analysis that could guide effective intervention strategies. Organizations survived and expanded despite documented ineffectiveness because they served donor needs for moral satisfaction more effectively than they addressed recipient needs for practical assistance, creating sustainable business models based on charitable feelings rather than measurable outcomes. The long-term impact included institutional networks that persisted long after their founding purposes became obviously obsolete, continuing to process women through systems that provided temporary relief while maintaining underlying conditions that ensure continued need for services. Reverend Pemberton concludes a morning meeting by announcing plans for expanding institutional capacity while maintaining identical approaches that have produced consistent failure for decades. The board approves increased fundraising targets and enhanced publicity campaigns designed to attract donors who believe their contributions purchase social transformation rather than institutional sustainability. Another planning session ends with renewed commitment to strategies that satisfy reformer consciences while systematically failing the women they claim to serve, proving that good intentions combined with willful ignorance of evidence can sustain elaborate charitable enterprises indefinitely regardless of their actual effectiveness at achieving stated objectives. Afternoon shadows gather in the back room of Mrs. Kelly's boarding house as 8 women huddle around a scarred wooden table, sharing intelligence with the precision of military strategists planning campaign operations. Their conversation operates in coded whispers that discuss institutional weaknesses, staff vulnerabilities, and systemic loopholes that can be exploited for survival advantage. This informal network processes information faster than official charity communications, creating alternative knowledge systems that prioritize practical outcomes over moral transformation. Margaret Sullivan, veteran of 17 different rescue institutions, leads a discussion with authority earned through systematic exploitation of charitable resources across London's reform landscape. Her expertise includes detailed analysis of which homes provide better food rations, which missions offer medical care without excessive religious requirements, and which institutions can be manipulated for temporary shelter during harsh weather without accepting long-term moral supervision. Survival strategies focus on playing institutional systems while maintaining personal autonomy that reformers seek to eliminate. The women have learned to perform expected behaviors convincingly enough to access benefits while preserving inner resistance that protects essential identity from charitable colonization. Strategic compliance becomes high art when survival depends on satisfying contradictory demands from competing organizations that require different performance styles. The Underground Railroad of information operates through networks that span social and geographic boundaries, connecting women across districts through relationships that transcend institutional attempts at isolation and control. Intelligence travels about which homes allow early departures, which staff members accept small bribes for preferential treatment, and which board members can be manipulated through carefully performed gratitude that disguises systematic exploitation. Strategic use of reform services maximizes resource extraction while minimizing commitment to organizational objectives that conflict with personal goals. Women learn access temporary shelter during police crackdowns, obtain medical care for occupational injuries, and secure meals during economic downturns without accepting the spiritual transformation that institutions demand as payment for practical assistance. A mainstream fact emerges from police surveillance reports. Authorities noted that many women provided false names and personal histories to different institutions, creating multiple identities that prevented accurate tracking while enabling repeated access to services theoretically limited to first-time users. The deception required considerable skill and memory to maintain consistency across institutions that might compare records. The art of performing repentance develops into sophisticated theatrical presentation that convinces reform staff of genuine spiritual conversion while maintaining private skepticism about institutional methods and objectives. Successful performances require understanding audience expectations, delivering appropriate emotional responses, and maintaining character consistency over extended periods that can last months. Leadership within informal networks typically falls to older women whose institutional experience provides younger members with survival knowledge that official programs never teach. These mentorship relationships create bonds stronger than family connections, while transmitting practical wisdom about navigating charitable systems that claim to help while systematically controlling their supposed beneficiaries. Resistance techniques include coordinated work slowdowns that disrupt institutional schedules, strategic rule violations that overwhelm disciplinary systems, and mass departures timed to maximize operational chaos while demonstrating collective agency that challenges administrative authority. The tactics require coordination and timing that prove women possessed organizational skills that reformers consistently underestimated. A quirky tidbit reveals creative collaboration. Some women developed elaborate fictional backstories that they share between institutions, creating consistent alternative identities, complete with inventive family histories, employment records, and moral fall narratives that satisfied institutional requirements for dramatic conversion testimonies, while protecting actual personal information from charitable surveillance. The first joke emerges from performance quality. Academy Award level acting occurred daily in reform home chapels, where women delivered spiritual testimonies with emotional authenticity that would have impressed professional theater directors while concealing private attitudes that remained untouched by institutional intervention. The economics of strategic compliance involve careful calculation of costs versus benefits when temporary institutional cooperation might provide access to resources that outweigh the psychological expense of performing expected gratitude and submission. Women develop sophisticated analytical skills for evaluating whether particular institutional arrangements offer net advantages despite their obvious restrictions and humiliations. Genuine friendships form within restrictive environments, as shared resistance creates bonds that survive institutional discharge and continue providing mutual support long after individual women move beyond charitable supervision. These relationships demonstrate that human connection transcends organizational attempts to control social formation through regulated interaction and monitored communication. Skills acquisition occurs despite institutional intentions, as women learn literacy, organizational techniques, and public speaking abilities through exposure to charitable operations that inadvertently provide education while attempting moral reformation. The unintended learning often proves more valuable than official curricula designed to produce compliant domestic workers rather than independent agents. Historians still argue about how much genuine agency women retain versus the extent of institutional control, though evidence suggests that even total institutions fail to eliminate individual autonomy when inmates develop collective strategies for preserving essential aspects of personal identity while accommodating external demands for behavioral compliance. Former inmates often become informal leaders and information brokers who maintain connections across institutional boundaries, creating intelligence networks that operate independently of official charitable coordination while serving similar populations through methods based on mutual respect rather than moral superiority and administrative control. Cross-class alliances develop when middle-class women involved in reform work recognize the humanity and intelligence of those they were supposed to manage, leading to genuine partnerships that transcend social boundaries while working within systems that officially maintain rigid hierarchical relationships based on moral and economic status. Long-term networks survive beyond individual institutional experiences, creating support systems that provide practical assistance, emotional comfort, and collective resistance strategies that operate independently of official charitable services, while addressing similar needs through methods that preserve dignity and autonomy. The second joke writes itself through educational comparisons. Graduates of the University of Hard Knocks often possess better survival skills than Oxford-educated gentlemen, demonstrating practical intelligence that formal education rarely developed while navigating social challenges that privileged men never encountered. Some rescue workers undergo transformation through sustained contact with the women they serve, discovering that their supposed charges possess wisdom, resilience, and analytical capabilities that challenge assumptions about moral hierarchy and intellectual capacity that justified charitable intervention in the first place. The afternoon session concludes with updated intelligence about new institutional policies, staff changes that create opportunities or threats, and strategic recommendations for maximizing benefit extraction while minimizing compliance costs. The network continues its work of mutual support that operates despite rather than because of institutional intervention, proving that human solidarity survives even systematic attempts to destroy collective resistance through individual reformation programs. These women have created parallel systems that serve their actual needs while satisfying official requirements enough to avoid complete exclusion from resources they need for survival. Their agency operates within constraints but never surrenders to the charitable colonization that reformers mistake for successful moral transformation. Evening gaslight flickers across polished mahogany surfaces in Mrs. Charlotte Hamilton's exclusive establishment on Berkeley Square, where crystal decanters catch amber reflections and Persian carpets muffle the footsteps of gentlemen who arrive through discreet side entrances. This represents the apex of commercial sex work, luxury operations that rival the finest hotels and appointments while surpassing them in discretion, and specialized services tailored to clients whose social positions demand absolute confidentiality. The business model operates on principles of exclusivity and investment in atmospheric details that justify premium pricing. Expensive furnishings serve dual purposes as status symbols and practical investments that appreciate over time while creating environments that allow wealthy clients to maintain their self-image as connoisseurs rather than mere purchasers of physical services. Every element from silk wallpapers to imported champagne contributes to carefully crafted illusions of sophisticated social interaction. Mrs. Hamilton functions as entrepreneur managing complex operations that require skills and staff supervision, client relations, financial planning, and political networking that would challenge legitimate business owners. Her responsibilities include recruiting and training women, screening potential clients for financial reliability and discretion, maintaining relationships with suppliers and service providers, and managing the delicate police arrangements that ensure operational security without legal complications. The economics of luxury operate through margins that would astound conventional retailers. A mainstream fact illuminates the pricing structure. High-end establishments charge 5 to 50 guineas per visit when factory workers earn 15 shillings weekly, creating income differentials that reflected not only service quality, but social exclusivity that wealthy clients valued as much as physical gratification. Staff hierarchy reflects careful recruitment and development strategies that range from street-level talent scouts who identify promising candidates to specialized trainers who provide instruction in languages, music, literature, and social graces that enable women to interact convincingly with educated clientele. Some establishments maintain connections with impoverished genteel families whose daughters require discrete income sources while preserving social respectability through carefully maintained fictional employment. Client screening processes protect both reputation and financial security through investigation methods that verify creditworthiness, social status, and discretionary behavior before admission to exclusive circles where indiscretion could destroy multiple reputations simultaneously. Blacklisting systems operate across establishments to exclude problematic individuals who demonstrate violence, financial unreliability, or tendencies toward public scandal that threaten the entire luxury market segment. Seasonal business cycles follow social calendar rhythms as parliamentary sessions bring provincial members to London with expense accounts and temporary freedom from domestic supervision, while racing seasons and court presentations create concentrated periods of elevated demand that require careful staffing adjustments and premium pricing strategies. A quirky tidbit reveals attention to atmospheric detail. Some houses employed French maids and Italian cooks specifically to enhance exotic atmosphere that distinguish their offerings from domestic alternatives, creating international flavors that appeal to clients whose travel experiences generated expectations of continental sophistication. The first joke emerges from competitive comparisons. Many establishments maintain wine cellars superior to those found in prestigious gentlemen's clubs, leading to situations where members sought better vintages in brothels than their own exclusive social organizations could provide. Protection through respectability operates via charitable donations, neighborhood improvement contributions, and political connections that create stakeholder interests in operational continuity. Mrs. Hamilton serves on ladies' charitable committees while hosting private dinner parties for local officials whose goodwill ensures regulatory cooperation that allows business operations to continue without legal harassment. International recruitment networks tap European sources for women marketed as exotic specialties who command premium rates through cultural novelty that appeals to clients seeking experiences unavailable through domestic talent pools. These arrangements require sophisticated logistics for transportation, documentation, and cultural adaptation that reflect the global scope of luxury commercial sex markets. Medical arrangements prioritize preventive care through discreet physicians who provide regular examinations, contraceptive advice, and pregnancy management services that protect both health and earning capacity. These professional relationships operate outside normal medical practice boundaries, while maintaining clinical standards that serve business interests through workforce protection strategies. Historians still argue about actual profit margins versus operational costs of luxury establishments, as accurate financial records remain scarce, while expense categories include bribes, protection payments, and capital investments that complicate standard business accounting methods applied to enterprises operating within legal gray areas. Competition between houses generates warfare conducted through client theft, staff poaching, and reputation attacks that employ gossip networks, planted stories, and strategic scandals designed to damage rivals while protecting one's own market position. The battles require intelligence gathering and strategic thinking that rival commercial or political campaigns. Trusted servants play crucial roles in maintaining operational security through selective blindness, message carrying, and early warning systems that protect against police raids, client indiscretions, and competitor espionage that could compromise carefully constructed business arrangements built on confidentiality and mutual dependency. The second joke writes itself through economic paradox. Discretion commanded higher prices and actual services, creating situations where silence costs more than performance while generating greater client satisfaction through psychological comfort than physical pleasure provided. Retirement planning for successful madams involves property investment portfolios, legitimate business fronts, and social positioning that enables transition from illegal operations to respectable community status, without losing accumulated wealth or facing retrospective legal consequences that might threaten financial security. Competition extends beyond simple commercial rivalry into complex territorial agreements, staff sharing arrangements, and collaborative client management that creates informal cartels designed to maintain pricing structures while preventing destructive competition that might attract unwanted official attention or reduce overall market profitability. The role of financial intermediaries includes bankers willing to handle questionable deposits, investment advisors who ask no uncomfortable questions, and lawyers who provide legal services while maintaining professional ignorance about income sources that enable wealthy women to participate in legitimate economic activities. Quality control systems ensure consistent service standards through training programs, performance monitoring, and client feedback mechanisms that maintain reputation for excellence while identifying problems before they escalate into operational crises that might threaten establishment viability or market position. Dawn breaks over Berkeley Square as Mrs. Hamilton reviews the night's receipts and plans the day's administrative tasks that maintain her position as successful entrepreneur in London's most exclusive and profitable underground industry. The careful illusions and calculated luxury continue their work of transforming commercial sex into sophisticated entertainment that satisfies wealthy clients' needs for both physical gratification and social validation, while generating substantial profits through systematic exploitation of class anxieties and masculine insecurities that drive demand for expensive discretion. Night transforms the Canterbury Music Hall into a blazing cathedral of entertainment as gas jets flare along ornate columns, while hundreds of voices roar approval for a comic singer whose jokes about marriage would scandalize drawing rooms but delight audiences fueled by cheap gin and expensive hopes. The venue operates as more than an entertainment destination. It functions as an elaborate marketplace where business mingles with pleasure through arrangements that benefit everyone from performers to proprietors to the women who work the crowded galleries and private boxes. Entertainment venues serve as natural meeting grounds where social boundaries blur under influence of alcohol and shared laughter, creating environments that facilitate commercial negotiations impossible in more formal settings. The symbiotic relationship benefits all parties. Venues need customers who purchase drinks and return regularly, while women need clients with money to spend and inhibitions lowered enough to make generous arrangements without excessive negotiation or moral qualms. The performer-prostitute overlap creates fluid categories as singers and dancers supplement irregular entertainment income through private arrangements with admirers who appreciate both artistic and intimate talents. Many performers maintain dual careers that provide financial security when theatrical employment proves unreliable, while their stage visibility attracts clients willing to pay premium rates for celebrity associations and social prestige. A mainstream fact illuminates the scale of integration. London housed over 300 music halls by 1875, with most venues tolerating or actively encouraging commercial sex work that increased customer spending while extending visit durations that maximize per patron revenue through sustained alcohol consumption and repeat visits that built loyal customer bases. The economics of entertainment operate through multiple revenue streams, including admission fees, alcohol sales, private booth rentals, and unofficial percentages from commercial arrangements conducted on premises. Management complicity extends beyond passive tolerance to active facilitation through discreet meeting spaces, early warning systems about police presence, and staff training that maximizes opportunities for profitable customer interactions. International performers bring diverse cultural approaches to commercial sex work that enrich local offerings while challenging traditional English reserve about sexuality and entertainment. French chanteuses, Italian dancers, and German musicians introduce continental attitudes that prove popular with audiences seeking sophistication and exotic experiences unavailable through domestic entertainment options. A quirky tidbit reveals institutional hypocrisy. Many halls officially employed waiter girls whose job descriptions included serving drinks and light refreshments, though unofficial expectations clearly encompass additional services that management acknowledged through higher wages and flexible scheduling that accommodated private arrangements with generous customers. The first joke emerges from performance observation. Some entertainers gave their best encores in private settings that never appeared on official programs, though audience satisfaction remained consistently higher than conventional theatrical, reviews could measure or document through normal critical evaluation methods. Geography determines venue character as different halls serve distinct social classes through programming and pricing strategies that attract appropriate clientele while maintaining neighborhood compatibility. West End venues cater to wealthy patrons seeking refined entertainment, while East End halls provide working-class entertainment that emphasizes participatory enjoyment over passive consumption of high culture. Police arrangements operate through regular payment schedules that ensure selective blindness during performances while maintaining public order that satisfies official responsibilities without interfering with profitable activities that generate substantial unofficial revenue for law enforcement personnel who understand that cooperation proves more lucrative than strict enforcement. Seasonal programming adapts to social calendar rhythms as Christmas pantomimes attract family audiences during holidays. Summer garden parties provide outdoor entertainment during pleasant weather, and election celebrations offer partisan entertainment that draws politically engaged crowds with money to spend on both alcohol and companionship during exciting civic periods. Historians still argue about whether music halls corrupted public morality or simply reflected existing social attitudes in more honest and accessible formats than respectable entertainment venues that maintain artificial moral standards while privately tolerating identical behaviors among wealthy patrons who could afford discreet indulgence. Alcohol facilitates business negotiations by lowering inhibitions, increasing generosity, and creating social lubricant that enables conversations impossible in sober circumstances. Gin palaces function as unofficial brothels where commercial sex work operates under cover of entertainment and social drinking that provides plausible explanations for extended visits and private conversations. Competition between venues drives innovation in both entertainment programming and commercial facilitation as proprietors compete for popular performers who attract reliable audiences and generous customers willing to spend substantial sums on both official and unofficial services offered through integrated entertainment and commercial sex work operations. The second joke writes itself through audience behavior. Patrons often applauded performances that hadn't officially started yet, demonstrating enthusiasm for entertainment that transcended formal programming while acknowledging activities that everyone understood despite official denial of their existence or commercial significance. Popular entertainment transforms through commercial sex work integration that creates hybrid cultural forms combining theatrical performance with social interaction and commercial negotiation that generates new entertainment categories, serving diverse audience needs while maximizing venue profitability through comprehensive service offerings. Management strategies include staff training programs that teach subtle facilitation techniques, facility design that provides appropriate meeting spaces and privacy options, and scheduling flexibility that accommodates both official entertainment programming and unofficial commercial activities that require discrete timing and careful coordination to avoid conflicts with public performances. Customer loyalty develops through venues that successfully integrate entertainment quality with commercial opportunity access, creating repeat patronage patterns that generate sustainable revenue streams, while building community relationships that benefit all participants through mutual dependency and shared interests in venue success and operational security. The evening concludes as curtains fall on official performances, while private negotiations begin in discreet alcoves and rented rooms where entertainment transitions from public spectacle to personal service, demonstrating the fluid boundaries between legitimate theater and commercial sex work that characterize Victorian popular culture. Dawn approaches as the Canterbury Music Hall settles into quiet preparation for tomorrow's performances, having successfully served as both entertainment venue and commercial marketplace through arrangements that satisfy diverse customer needs while generating profits for proprietors, performers, and working women who understood that survival required adapting to opportunities wherever they presented themselves in London's complex economy of pleasure and pragmatism. Afternoon sunlight streams through tall windows of Mrs. Victoria Ashworth's private office, illuminating leather-bound ledgers spread across a mahogany desk, where columns of figures document the profitable transformation of human intimacy into commercial enterprise. At 47, she commands a business empire that would impress legitimate merchants while requiring entrepreneurial skills that few universities taught and no respectable schools acknowledged as valuable professional training. The entrepreneurial demands prove formidable as successful operation requires expertise in accounting, staff management, customer relations, security arrangements, legal risk assessment, and psychological manipulation that combines maternal authority with calculated business judgment. Mrs. Ashworth manages 37 women across 4 establishments while maintaining detailed financial records that track everything from silk stocking expenses to police bribery costs with precision that would satisfy any bank examiner. Investment strategies focus on long-term asset accumulation through property acquisition in districts where real estate values appreciate, while zoning enforcement remains negotiably flexible. Staff training represents significant capital expenditure as women require instruction in languages, social graces, fashion sense, and specialized services that command premium pricing from discriminating clientele who expect sophistication alongside physical gratification. The career path from worker to manager remains rare, but occasionally achievable through combination of business acumen, client relationship skills, and accumulation of sufficient capital to finance independent operations. Mrs. Ashworth began as a 17-year-old domestic servant before progressing through various establishments to acquire knowledge and connections necessary for entrepreneurial success that required 15 years of strategic planning and careful resource management. A mainstream fact illuminates potential rewards. Successful madams could accumulate wealth equivalent to 10,000 to 50,000 pounds in modern currency, creating financial independence that surpassed most legitimate business opportunities available to Victorian women, while requiring acceptance of social ostracism and constant legal vulnerability that accompanied substantial profits. Staff recruitment operates through systematic targeting of displaced domestic servants, unemployed factory workers, and rural migrants whose circumstances create desperation that skilled operators can channel into profitable employment arrangements. Mrs. Ashworth maintains networks of informants who identify promising candidates while screening for physical attractiveness, psychological resilience, and potential trainability that determine suitability for different market segments. Client relationship management employs sophisticated techniques, including credit systems for trusted customers, loyalty programs that reward regular patronage, and reference requirements that screen for financial reliability while protecting establishment reputation. Customer files document payment histories, service preferences, family situations, and personal vulnerabilities that enable customized service delivery while providing leverage for ensuring discretionary behavior. A quirky tidbit reveals organizational sophistication. Some madams maintain detailed client files containing information about wives' travel schedules, business financial pressures, political ambitions, and medical conditions that enable strategic timing of services, while providing insurance against potential scandals or legal difficulties that might threaten operational security. The first joke emerges from intimate knowledge. Experienced madams often understood clients' wives better than the husbands did themselves, having invested more time in studying family dynamics and personal psychology than men, who took domestic relationships for granted while seeking excitement through commercial alternatives. Competition analysis requires constant monitoring of rival establishments' pricing structures, service innovations, staff quality, and customer satisfaction levels that determine market position within highly competitive industries where reputation and perceived value justify premium pricing or condemn operators to discount markets with reduced profit margins. Legal risk management involves maintaining lawyer retainers for handling arrests and licensing disputes, systematic police payments for operational protection, and political connections that provide early warning about regulatory changes or enforcement campaigns that might threaten business continuity through sudden policy shifts or administrative crackdowns. Seasonal staffing challenges require flexible workforce management as demand fluctuates with social calendar rhythms, parliamentary sessions, and economic cycles that create busy periods requiring temporary staff augmentation balanced against slow seasons when reduced capacity prevents excessive overhead costs from eliminating profitability during lean months. International business connections enable European recruitment of exotic workers who command premium pricing through cultural novelty while creating supply chains for luxury goods, specialized services, and foreign currency transactions that serve wealthy clients seeking experiences unavailable through domestic providers operating within conventional cultural boundaries. Historians still argue about whether madams primarily exploited vulnerable women through economic manipulation or provided better working conditions, medical care, and earnings opportunities than alternative employment in factories, domestic service, or street-level sex work that offered fewer protections and lower financial returns. Retirement planning involves strategic business sales, successor training, and profit investment in legitimate enterprises that provide respectable income sources while protecting accumulated wealth from legal challenges or social persecution that might threaten financial security during vulnerable later years when active management becomes impossible. The psychological toll of managing intimate services alongside business operations creates unique stresses, as successful madams must maintain emotional distance from human suffering while demonstrating maternal care that motivates staff loyalty, calculating exploitation of client vulnerabilities, while providing satisfying experiences that ensure repeat business. The second joke writes itself through skill requirements. Operating successful establishments demanded more diverse abilities than most legitimate businesses required, combining financial management, personnel psychology, diplomatic negotiation, and crisis management that would challenge professional administrators while receiving no social recognition for demonstrated competence. Gender dynamics prove particularly complex in industries where women often wielded real economic power while operating outside legal protections, creating situations where female entrepreneurs accumulated substantial wealth and exercised significant authority while remaining vulnerable to male violence, legal persecution, and social ostracism that legitimate businessmen never faced. Competition extends beyond simple commercial rivalry into complex territorial agreements, staff-sharing arrangements, and collaborative approaches to police relations that create informal business associations designed to maintain industry stability while preventing destructive competition that might attract unwanted official attention or reduce overall profitability. Evening approaches as Mrs. Ashworth reviews staff schedules, client appointments, and financial projections for another night of calculated commerce that transforms personal intimacy into profitable enterprise through systematic management of human desires, economic vulnerabilities, and social hypocrisies that sustain demand for services that respectable society officially condemns while privately patronizing. The business of vice continues its profitable operation through entrepreneurial skills that society refuses to acknowledge, while generating wealth that provides economic independence for women willing to accept social stigma in exchange for financial autonomy unavailable through conventional career paths that offer respectability without substantial monetary rewards. Morning mist clings to Soho's narrow streets as discreet financial transactions unfold in Giuseppe's coffee house, where coded conversations about territories and protection payments flow as smoothly as the dark roast that masks more than caffeine in its bitter depths. Thomas McKay slides 3 sovereigns across a marble table to Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood while discussing delivery schedules and warehouse security that would mystify legitimate businessmen, but represent essential commerce in London's shadow economy. The protection economy operates through systematic payments that purchase safety from violence, police interference, and competitive encroachment on established territories. McKay's organization collects weekly tribute from 47 working women across 6 districts, providing services that range from physical security against violent clients to early warning systems about police raids that could disrupt earning opportunities during crucial income periods. Informal banking networks serve populations excluded from legitimate credit institutions that refuse loans to women without male guarantors or respectable employment documentation. Mrs. Blackwood operates lending services that advance money for medical emergencies, legal fees, or temporary lodging costs at interest rates that reflect both risk and necessity, while providing financial lifelines unavailable through conventional banking relationships. The financial ecosystem extends beyond direct participants to include publicans who cash foreign coins, lodging housekeepers who provide secure storage for valuables, and shop owners who convert luxury goods into ready money through discreet transactions that avoid uncomfortable questions about income sources or ownership documentation that might complicate otherwise straightforward commercial exchanges. A mainstream fact illuminates economic scale. Police estimates suggest that London's sex industry generated between £2 and £5 million annually, creating underground cash flows that rival legitimate commercial sectors while operating entirely outside official taxation and regulation systems that govern conventional business enterprises and commercial activities. Territorial agreements reduce destructive competition through systematic division of streets, client bases, and operating schedules that prevent conflicts while maximizing overall industry profitability. The Whitechapel Cooperative manages territory allocation, dispute resolution, and collective security arrangements that function more efficiently than many legitimate trade associations while maintaining operational secrecy essential for continued success. Mutual aid societies provide insurance functions for illness, injury, and imprisonment through collective contributions that create safety nets unavailable through official charitable organizations or government assistance programs that typically exclude or discriminate against women engaged in commercially stigmatized activities that society officially condemns while privately patronizing. Currency exchange services accommodate foreign sailors carrying Spanish silver, Portuguese gold, and exotic coins that require conversion into British currency through specialists who assess authenticity, calculate exchange rates, and manage transactions that legitimate banks might refuse to handle due to irregular documentation or questionable provenance. A quirky tidbit reveals innovative adaptation. Some districts develop token systems that allow credit purchases across multiple businesses, creating local currencies that facilitate trade while protecting participants from carrying excessive cash that might attract thieves or create evidence of illegal income sources during police searches. The first joke emerges from commercial comparison. Underground credit networks often prove more reliable than legitimate merchant arrangements, providing faster service, more flexible terms, and greater discretion than respectable businesses that demanded extensive documentation while delivering inferior customer service. Fences convert stolen goods into cash through networks that transform jewelry, silk scarves, and luxury items obtained through various means into liquid assets that fund business operations, personal expenses, and investment opportunities that create legitimate wealth from questionable sources through systematic laundering operations. Investment opportunities include property ownership through intermediaries who purchase real estate for women legally prohibited from independent transactions, legitimate business fronts that provide respectable income sources, and educational expenses for children who might escape their mother's circumstances through academic achievement and social mobility. Historians still argue about actual money flows versus police estimates that may have reflected moral panic exaggeration rather than accurate financial analysis, though available evidence suggests substantial economic activity that supported thousands of participants while generating significant cash flows through London's underground commercial networks. Seasonal financial planning addresses income fluctuations through savings programs that accumulate resources during profitable periods while providing reserves for slow seasons when demand decreases due to weather, economic downturns, or social calendar changes that affect client availability and spending patterns throughout annual business cycles. Banking relationships involve discrete private financiers who serve illegitimate wealth through services that include secure deposits, investment advice, and international money transfers that enable women to support families abroad or acquire foreign property investments that provide future security outside British legal jurisdiction. International money transfers support extended families in Ireland, Scotland, and continental Europe through remittance systems that rival official postal arrangements while providing economic lifelines for rural communities depend on urban daughters whose income sources remain diplomatically unspecified in family correspondence. Legal complications include inheritance restrictions that prevent women from leaving property children, business ownership laws that require male supervision, and documentation requirements that create barriers for unofficial income sources, while protecting accumulated wealth through complex arrangements involving multiple intermediaries and legal fictions. The second joke writes itself through complexity comparisons. Financial planning for underground enterprises required more sophisticated strategies than operating the Bank of England, combining international currency management, risk assessment, legal avoidance, and investment diversification that would challenge professional financiers operating within legitimate regulatory frameworks. Retirement economics address fundamental questions about what happened when age or illness ended earning capacity, creating urgent needs for accumulated wealth, alternative income sources, and social support systems that could sustain women whose careers provided no official pensions or social security benefits through conventional employment channels. The complex web of financial relationships supports thousands of lives and livelihoods through interdependent networks that provide economic security, mutual assistance, and collective protection that government services and legitimate businesses fail to offer populations excluded from conventional social support systems through legal discrimination and moral condemnation. Credit systems extend throughout districts as shopkeepers, landlords, and service providers accept payment arrangements that recognize irregular income patterns, while providing essential goods and services that enable continued business operations through temporary financial difficulties or seasonal revenue fluctuations that characterize underground commercial activities. Morning business concludes as participants disperse to legitimate occupations that provide social respectability, while underground financial networks continue their work of moving money, managing risk, and supporting economic activities that official London refuses to acknowledge, while privately depending upon their contributions to overall commercial prosperity and social stability. Dawn light filters weakly through grimy windows of Hartwell's apothecary on Commercial Street, illuminating rows of glass bottles containing mercury compounds that gleam like liquid silver while promising salvation and delivering slow poisoning to desperate customers who cannot afford legitimate medical care. The shop operates at the intersection of medicine and desperation, where Victorian scientific confidence meets economic necessity through transactions that reveal both the era's medical limitations and its moral hypocrisies. The medical reality proves brutal for women whose occupational hazards include syphilis, gonorrhea, and tuberculosis, alongside the routine violence and economic uncertainty that define their working conditions. These diseases spread through populations who lack access to preventive care, accurate medical information, or effective treatments that remain experimental even for wealthy patients who can afford qualified physicians and hospital care. Victorian medicine's limitations create situations where mercury poisoning disguised as medical treatment often proves more dangerous than the original diseases it supposedly addresses. Physicians prescribe mercury compounds with confidence based on theoretical understanding rather than empirical evidence, creating treatment protocols that systematically damage patients while satisfying professional pride in scientific approaches that prioritize theoretical elegance over practical outcomes. The economics of illness create devastating cycles as women lose income precisely when they need expensive medical treatments, creating impossible choices between continued work that worsens health conditions and medical care that eliminates earning capacity during recovery periods that may extend for months without guarantee of successful treatment or restore health. A mainstream fact cuts through Victorian medical optimism. Venereal disease rates among prostitutes reach 5 to 10 times higher than general population levels, reflecting both occupational exposure and limited access to preventive care or effective treatment that might reduce transmission rates and long-term health consequences for affected women. Self-medication with laudanum for pain relief, gin for antiseptic purposes, and folk remedies passed down through generations of working women provides practical alternatives to expensive medical consultations that often prove ineffective while consuming resources needed for basic survival necessities like food, shelter, and clothing maintenance. Quack doctors prey on desperate women through promises of miracle cures that exploit hope while delivering treatments ranging from harmless placebos to dangerous experiments that satisfy practitioners' curiosity while endangering patients who lack alternatives to irregular medical practitioners operating outside professional oversight or legal accountability. The underground medical economy includes discreet physicians who charge premium rates for confidential treatment that avoids moral judgment while providing varying degrees of actual medical competence. These arrangements serve women who can afford private care while maintaining the secrecy essential for continued earning capacity in occupations that require physical attractiveness and apparent health. A quirky tidbit reveals desperate adaptation. Some women traded sexual services directly for medical treatment when cash proved unavailable, creating barter arrangements that complicated professional medical relationships while demonstrating the extent to which economic necessity overrode conventional social boundaries and professional ethics. The first joke emerges from treatment observation. Mercury compounds cause more bodily shaking than riding London omnibuses over cobblestone streets, though the medical profession maintained that tremors indicated therapeutic effectiveness rather than systematic poisoning that damaged patients, while enriching practitioners. Pregnancy management in an era of dangerous abortion procedures creates additional health risks through techniques that range from herbal abortifacients to surgical interventions performed without anesthesia or antiseptic protocols that prevent infection. Many women attempt self-induced miscarriages using methods that prove more dangerous than continued pregnancy under difficult circumstances. Older women serve as informal medical advisors whose experience provides practical knowledge about symptom management, treatment options, and preventive strategies that official medicine ignores or condemns as superstitious despite demonstrated effectiveness in managing health problems within resource constraints that limit access to professional care. Herbal knowledge passed down through generations of working women includes remedies for common ailments, contraceptive techniques, and health maintenance strategies that operate independently of official medical systems, while providing practical solutions based on accumulated experience rather than theoretical training. Historians still argue about actual disease transmission rates versus moral panic statistics that may have exaggerated health problems to justify increased regulation and social control rather than accurately documenting public health conditions requiring practical intervention and resource allocation for effective treatment programs. Preventive strategies include systematic washing, visual inspection of clients for obvious symptoms, and improvised protective barriers that provide limited protection while enabling continued work under conditions that make complete safety impossible given economic pressures and limited alternatives for income generation. Social stigma prevents access to legitimate medical care, as respectable physicians refuse to treat women whose occupations violate moral standards, while charitable hospitals exclude patients whose conditions result from supposedly voluntary moral behavior, rather than innocent misfortune deserving sympathetic treatment and professional care. The second joke writes itself through professional irony. Apothecaries often possess more practical knowledge about women's bodies than the women themselves, having observed treatment responses across multiple patients, while individual women experienced only their own symptoms and treatment outcomes. Alternative healing networks include wise women, experienced midwives, and folk practitioners whose knowledge operates outside official medical systems, while providing services that trained physicians cannot or will not deliver to populations excluded from respectable medical care through social prejudice and professional discrimination. Underground medical networks create referral systems that connect women with practitioners willing to provide discreet treatment, share information about effective remedies, and offer mutual support during illness that official medical systems ignore, while maintaining professional reputation through selective patient acceptance and moral judgment. The role of mutual assistance becomes crucial during health crises as women provide nursing care, share medications, and pool resources for medical expenses that individual patients cannot afford, while creating support systems that substitute for family care unavailable due to social ostracism and geographic displacement. Prevention education occurs through informal networks that share practical knowledge about disease recognition, transmission prevention, and early intervention strategies that reduce long-term health consequences, while operating entirely outside official public health programs that exclude target populations through moral qualification requirements. Dawn breaks over Commercial Street as another day of calculated medical risks begins for women whose occupational hazards include not only disease exposure, but systematic exclusion from medical care that treats health problems as moral failings rather than practical challenges requiring effective intervention and compassionate treatment regardless of social status or occupational choice. Midnight settles over Dorset Street like a predator claiming familiar territory, transforming autumn 1888's familiar dangers into supernatural terror that clings to every shadow and doorway. The fog carries whispers of fear thicker than coal smoke as Mary Kelly adjusts her shawl and calculates whether tonight's earnings justify the risk of venturing beyond her lodging house door into streets where violence has always lurked but recently acquired a name that sells newspapers and terrifies an entire city. The reality of violence before the Ripper included daily brutality that rarely merited police investigation or newspaper coverage. Client assaults, territorial disputes between competing women, and protection racket enforcement created routine dangers that working women accepted as occupational hazards requiring constant vigilance, but generating little official concern or public sympathy for victims whose occupations place them outside respectable society's protective boundaries. Client violence ranged from financial disputes that escalated into physical confrontation to sexual sadism that exploited women's vulnerability, while legal systems offered minimal protection for victims whose credibility faced automatic skepticism. Territorial conflict erupted when economic desperation drove women to encroach on established working areas, creating confrontations that could turn lethal when survival instincts overrode peaceful negotiation. The media sensation transforms routine urban violence into national obsession while systematically ignoring systemic brutality that claimed more lives than sensational murders ever would. Newspaper coverage prioritized dramatic individual cases over comprehensive analysis of social conditions that created environments where violence flourished unchecked and victims remained voiceless. A mainstream fact cuts through sensational coverage. Police recorded over 60 murders of prostitutes in the Whitechapel area between 1887 and 1891, with only 5 officially attributed to Jack the Ripper. The statistics reveal how media-focused distorted public understanding by emphasizing spectacular cases, while ignoring the systematic violence that represented far greater threats to women's daily survival. The transformation of routine danger into national obsession created perverse situations where unprecedented attention to prostitute murders coincided with increased harassment of living women whose earning capacity decreased as clients avoided areas associated with spectacular violence, while police pressure intensified under public scrutiny demanding visible enforcement action. Vigilante groups formed with noble intentions but created additional dangers through amateur detective work that interfered with professional investigations while generating false accusations, mob violence against innocent suspects, and territorial conflicts with established protection networks that had previously maintained relative stability through informal agreements and mutual interests. Tourism and voyeurism drew curious visitors seeking thrills through proximity to infamous murder sites, creating ghoulish spectacles that treated human tragedy as entertainment, while generating income opportunities for locals who capitalized on morbid fascination with violent death and urban poverty that respectable society normally ignored. A quirky tidbit reveals entrepreneurial adaptation. Some women began charging visitors to view murder locations, transforming personal tragedy into guided tour income that provided alternative earning sources when traditional work became too dangerous or clients too scarce during panic periods that disrupted normal commercial patterns. The first joke emerges from investigative chaos. Whitechapel streets contained more amateur detectives than actual police officers, creating situations where professional investigators spent more time managing civilian interference than conducting systematic criminal investigation that might have produced useful results. Business impact proved devastating as clients avoided areas associated with murder, while police harassment increased under public pressure to demonstrate active law enforcement. Women face impossible choices between earning income in dangerous conditions or avoiding work during periods when living expenses continued regardless of earning capacity. Survival strategies evolved rapidly as women adapted to unprecedented danger through group travel arrangements, routine changes that avoided predictable patterns, and information networks that shared intelligence about suspicious clients or dangerous locations while maintaining flexibility essential for continued income generation under changing circumstances. Class dynamics became apparent through media coverage that obsessed over East End violence while ignoring comparable brutality in West End districts where wealthy clients exercised violence against upscale prostitutes without generating comparable newspaper interest or public concern that might threaten respectable society's preferred ignorance. Historians still argue about whether the Ripper Panic ultimately helped women's safety through increased police presence and public attention, or hindered it by creating hysteria that disrupted established safety networks while generating additional harassment from authorities seeking visible enforcement action to satisfy public demands. Long-term impact on public perception included increased association of prostitution with extreme violence, creating lasting stereotypes that influence policy decisions and social attitudes while obscuring the economic circumstances that drove women into dangerous occupations requiring better social support rather than increased criminalization. International attention focused unwelcome scrutiny on London's social problems, generating diplomatic embarrassment that motivated government action aimed at managing public relations rather than addressing structural causes of urban poverty and violence that created conditions enabling systematic exploitation and abuse. The second joke writes itself through media irony. Foreign newspapers often contain more accurate information about Whitechapel conditions than local publications, as international correspondents operated without local political pressures that distorted domestic coverage toward sensationalism over systematic analysis. Reform groups and politicians exploited public fear through campaigns that promised safety, through increased moral regulation, while avoiding expensive social programs that might address underlying economic conditions, creating vulnerable populations susceptible to violence and exploitation by various predators, including serial killers. The panic created lasting changes in police policy, media coverage of violent crime, and public understanding of urban dangers, while failing to address the systematic violence that continued claiming victims whose deaths attracted less attention than spectacular murders that generated newspaper sales and political capital. Terror gradually normalized into background noise within lives already characterized by multiple dangers, proving that even sensational violence eventually becomes routine when survival requires continuing dangerous work regardless of additional risks, that media coverage transforms into public entertainment rather than calls for systematic social change. Mary Kelly returns to her room as church bells toll 1 o'clock. Having earned enough for tomorrow's rent, while calculating that tonight's risks prove manageable compared to the certainties of eviction and starvation that await those who allow fear to prevent essential income generation in occupations that have always demanded courage alongside other professional requirements. Evening shadows gather in the cramped room above Murphy's gin shop, where Mrs. Agnes Hartwell attends another difficult birth, her weather hands guiding new life into a world that offers uncertain welcome to children born without father's names or mother's security. The air thick with gin fumes and metallic scent of blood. She works by candlelight to deliver a child whose arrival represents both hope and economic catastrophe for a woman whose earning capacity disappears with her expanding waistline. Pregnancy transforms working women's lives into countdown timers measuring weeks until financial disaster. Mary O'Brien clutches the birthing rope while calculating the impossible mathematics of motherhood, 9 months of reduced income followed by indefinite periods of non-earning, while caring for an infant whose survival depends on resources she cannot provide to legitimate work that remains unavailable to women with illegitimate children. The underground network of abortionists operates through whispered referrals and coded advertisements offering female irregularity treatments and restoration of natural functions that promise relief through procedures ranging from herbal abortifacients to surgical interventions, performed with instruments designed for other purposes by practitioners whose qualifications vary dramatically from experienced medical professionals to desperate amateurs. Dangerous methods include pennyroyal oil that poisons as often as it terminated pregnancies, knitting needles that cause fatal hemorrhages, and lead-based compounds that damage nervous systems while failing to prevent births. The mortality rates from these procedures often exceeded the difficulties they were meant to solve, creating situations where attempted solutions proved more dangerous than continued pregnancy under impossible circumstances. Infanticide represents desperate survival strategy when other options prove unavailable or ineffective. The practice operates through active neglect, deliberate exposure, or direct violence that society officially condemns, while creating economic conditions that make such decisions rational responses to impossible circumstances, requiring choices no woman should face between her own survival and her child's life. A mainstream fact cuts through Victorian sentimentality. Infant mortality rates in prostitute communities reach 60 to 80% in some areas, reflecting both deliberate infanticide and natural mortality from malnutrition, disease, and inadequate medical care that claim children whose mothers lacked resources for proper nutrition, housing, and medical attention during crucial early months. Baby farming provides alternative solutions through arrangements where mothers pay other women to care for unwanted children, creating informal adoption networks that range from genuine nurturing relationships to systematic neglect that achieves infanticide through slower but equally certain means. The economics operate on sliding scales reflecting both parental resources and caretaker intentions. The economics of motherhood and extreme poverty create impossible calculations as women must choose between continued income generation through sex work that becomes difficult with visible pregnancy, alternative employment that pays insufficient wages for supporting children, or complete dependency on charity that strips away remaining autonomy while providing inadequate support. Wet nursing offers alternative income sources for women whose bodies produce milk during periods when their own children cannot be maintained, creating situations where biological mothers nurse wealthy infants while their own children receive inadequate nutrition from cheaper alternatives that reflect economic priorities rather than maternal instincts. A quirky tidbit reveals euphemistic advertising. Some baby farmers promoted permanent care arrangements that promise lifelong support for unwanted children, while operating as infanticide services that eliminated children through systematic neglect disguised as charitable child care, satisfying parental consciences while achieving desired outcomes through plausible deniability. The first joke emerges from maternal experience. Babies prove harder to manage than difficult clients, requiring constant tension, generating noise that attracts unwanted scrutiny, and consuming resources while producing no income, creating management challenges that exceed those posed by violent or demanding customers who at least pay for their troublesome behavior. Legal complications multiply through inheritance laws that deny illegitimate children rights to property, parental recognition, or social support that legitimate children receive automatically. These restrictions create additional incentives for infanticide or abandonment by removing long-term benefits that might justify short-term sacrifices required for child rearing under difficult circumstances. Foundling hospitals operate selective admission policies that prioritize children whose mothers demonstrate appropriate penitence, whose circumstances suggest temporary moral failing rather than systematic deviation from respectability, and whose physical condition indicates probability of survival that justifies institutional investment in care and training. Women supporting each other through pregnancy and childbirth create networks that provide practical assistance, including shared childcare responsibilities, medical knowledge about pregnancy and birth complications, and emotional support during periods when official society offers only condemnation and abandonment to women whose circumstances violate conventional moral expectations. The rare success stories document children who survived infancy to achieve education, stable employment, and social mobility that lifted them beyond their mother's circumstances through combination of individual determination, community support, and fortunate circumstances that align to provide opportunities for advancement despite unpromising beginnings. Historians still argue about actual infanticide rates versus natural mortality in poverty conditions, as statistical records remain incomplete while social stigma prevented accurate reporting of either deliberate infanticide or deaths from neglect that reflected systematic social failures rather than individual moral failings requiring criminal prosecution. Older women serve as midwives and advisors whose experience provides crucial knowledge about pregnancy management, birth assistance, and infant care that official medical systems ignore or condemn, while offering practical wisdom that saves lives through techniques developed through necessity rather than formal training. Alternative family structures emerge through communal child-rearing arrangements where surviving children receive care from multiple women who share resources and responsibilities, while creating support networks that substitute for nuclear family structures unavailable to women whose occupations and circumstances prevent conventional domestic arrangements. The second joke writes itself through educational observation. Children raised in these communities often receive more diverse education through street experience and adult conversation than middle-class children isolated in nurseries and schoolrooms, developing practical knowledge and survival skills that formal education rarely provided. The psychological toll of losing children repeatedly creates lasting trauma for women who experience multiple pregnancies, ending in death through disease, malnutrition, or infanticide decisions that haunt survivors, while representing rational responses to impossible circumstances created by social systems that criminalize symptoms while ignoring causes. Government policy consistently ignores root causes of infant mortality, while criminalizing desperate responses to systematic social failures that create conditions requiring impossible choices between competing survival necessities, treating individual symptoms rather than addressing structural problems that generate predictable tragedies. Dawn approaches as Mrs. Hartwell completes her work, having delivered another child into uncertain circumstances, surrounded by community support that provides what official society denies: practical assistance, emotional understanding, and collective determination that some children will survive and thrive despite conditions designed to eliminate those deemed socially undesirable. Dawn creeps across St. Bartholomew's pauper cemetery like a reluctant witness, illuminating rows of unmarked wooden crosses that stretch into morning mist, each representing a life concluded without ceremony, name, or mourner to mark its passing. The morning light reveals the ultimate destination for countless women whose stories end not in dramatic newspaper headlines, but in bureaucratic efficiency that processes human remains with administrative precision, while recording minimal details about lives lived in society's shadows. The statistics of mortality paint grim portraits of abbreviated existence as working women face lifespans shortened by occupational hazards, including violence, disease, malnutrition, and exposure to weather conditions that wore down bodies already stressed by economic uncertainty and social ostracism. Deaths came through client violence, territorial disputes, botched medical procedures, and diseases that ravaged populations without access to preventive care or effective treatment. Anonymous deaths occurred with disturbing frequency as bodies appeared in alleys, lodging houses, and riverbanks without identification, personal effects, or anyone willing to claim responsibility for burial arrangements. These discoveries generated brief police investigations that typically concluded with administrative disposal rather than genuine attempts to identify deceased individuals or locate families who might provide proper interment. The bureaucracy of death operated through coroner's inquests that processed cases with mechanical efficiency, designed to minimize expense rather than maximize justice or human dignity. Parish officials handle burial arrangements for unidentified bodies through standardized procedures that prioritize cost containment over respectful treatment of human remains representing completed lives deserving acknowledgement. A mainstream fact cuts through official indifference. Average lifespans for prostitutes measured 15 to 20 years shorter than general population figures, reflecting occupational hazards that included not only violence and disease, but systematic exclusion from medical care, social support systems, and economic opportunities that might have extended survival prospects under different circumstances. The economics of death created additional burdens for communities already struggling with basic survival needs. Funeral costs, coffin purchases, and burial plot fees consumed resources that living women could not afford while dealing with their own daily survival requirements, creating situations where proper burial became luxury rather than basic human dignity. Mass graves and shared coffins accommodated indigent dead through arrangements that maximized cemetery efficiency while minimizing per burial costs. Multiple bodies shared single coffins when individual containers proved too expensive, while common graves held dozens of remains under single markers that listed dates rather than names of those interred beneath anonymous soil. Workhouse mortuaries processed unknown bodies through institutional systems that treated human remains as administrative problems requiring efficient disposal rather than individuals deserving respectful treatment. These facilities operated morgues that stored bodies until burial arrangements could be completed through cheapest available methods regardless of deceased person's preferences or community traditions. A quirky tidbit reveals desperate foresight. Some women saved precious pennies specifically for funeral costs, preferring to sacrifice immediate necessities rather than risk pauper burial that would conclude their lives with institutional indignity, matching the systematic dehumanization they experienced while living under impossible circumstances. The first joke emerges from housing comparisons. Many women found better accommodations in death than they ever enjoyed while living, as coffins provided more privacy and weather protection than lodging houses offered during their lifetimes, though the improved housing came with obvious limitations regarding future enjoyment. Memorial practices among working women created informal traditions for remembering forgotten dead through storytelling, shared memories, and collective grief that substituted for official ceremonies unavailable to those whose lives concluded without social recognition or religious approval for burial in consecrated ground reserved for respectable deceased. Medical schools generated demand for cadavers that created resurrection trade involving grave robbing, body selling, and systematic theft of recently buried remains. Pauper cemeteries became particular targets for these activities since unmarked graves offered anonymous sources for anatomical specimens, while families lacked resources for preventing desecration. Newspaper obituaries reflected social hierarchies that determined whose deaths merited public notice versus silent disappearance from official records. Sensational murders generated extensive coverage, while routine deaths from poverty, disease, or violence passed unnoticed, except in police blotters that recorded administrative details without acknowledging human significance. Historians still argue about actual mortality statistics versus available records, as systematic underreporting, false identities, and administrative negligence created incomplete documentation that obscured true scope of premature death among populations whose lives remain largely invisible to official record-keeping systems that prioritize respectable citizens over marginalized communities. The impact on surviving communities included grief complicated by fear and uncertainty about their own mortality prospects, creating solidarity born from shared vulnerability, while generating mutual support systems that provided emotional comfort during periods when official society offered only condemnation rather than compassion for those mourning unofficial family members. Informal funeral societies emerged through pooling arrangements that enabled dignified burial for members who contributed small amounts during healthy periods to ensure proper treatment after death. These cooperative efforts created insurance systems that substituted for official funeral benefits unavailable to women whose occupations excluded them from legitimate burial societies. The contrast between anonymous death and sensationalized murder coverage revealed media priorities that treated routine mortality as unremarkable while exploiting spectacular violence for entertainment purposes that sold newspapers without addressing systematic causes of premature death among vulnerable populations requiring practical assistance rather than sensational coverage. The second joke writes itself through institutional knowledge. Gravediggers possess more accurate local history than parish clerks, having buried more residents than official records documented, while maintaining better memory of individual stories than bureaucratic systems that reduced human lives to statistical entries. Legacy questions haunted survivors who wonder about children left orphaned, possessions abandoned in lodging houses, and memories maintained only by fellow workers who might themselves disappear without trace, creating situations where entire life histories vanished when communities dispersed or individuals moved beyond local knowledge networks. The search for meaning in meaningless deaths led some women to create informal memorial practices, including shared stories, preserved personal items, and collective promises to remember forgotten names while ensuring that individual humanity persisted despite systematic efforts to reduce human beings to administrative problems requiring efficient disposal. Dawn light reveals the full scope of unmarked graves stretching beyond sight, each cross representing completed existence that official society chose to ignore while living and forgot immediately after death, creating permanent testimony to systematic indifference that treated human beings as disposable commodities whose stories deserved neither recording nor remembering. The morning brings another day of survival calculations for living women who understand that their own stories might conclude with similar anonymity, motivating them to create meaning through mutual support and collective memory that preserves human dignity despite social systems designed to eliminate evidence of lives deemed unworthy of official acknowledgement or lasting commemoration. Late evening mist rises from the Thames as you find yourself seated on weathered stone steps beside the ancient river, watching fog soften London's harsh edges into gentle watercolor washes that blur the boundaries between buildings and sky. The intensity of previous hours begins to fade like gaslight dimmed for sleep, replaced by contemplative quiet that allows space for reflection on the remarkable stories witnessed throughout this journey into lives that history too often forgets. The river flows with eternal patience beside your thoughts, carrying the day's detritus toward distant seas, while serving as perfect metaphor for human persistence. Water continuing its ancient course despite all the human struggles, triumphs, and tragedies played out along its banks. The Thames has witnessed centuries of London life, absorbing stories and secrets while maintaining its steady rhythm that outlasts individual sorrows and celebrates collective resilience. Reflecting on the dignity witnessed throughout this exploration reveals extraordinary strength displayed by women facing impossible circumstances with remarkable grace. Their resilience emerged not through dramatic gestures, but through daily acts of survival, mutual support, and determined maintenance of humanity despite systematic efforts to strip away their personhood and reduce complex individuals to simple moral categories. A mainstream fact settles into the evening quiet. Despite all hardships documented throughout these pages, communities of women consistently supported each other through informal networks that historians are only now beginning to understand and appreciate. These relationships provided practical assistance, emotional comfort, and collective wisdom that enabled survival under conditions designed to ensure failure and despair. Small acts of kindness observed throughout this journey illuminate the essential humanity that persisted through degrading circumstances. Women sharing scarce food with hungrier companions, warning each other about dangerous clients or police raids, caring for sick friends without expectation of reward, and maintaining hope when rational analysis suggested despair might prove more logical. The seasonal shift becomes apparent as winter's harshness gradually yields to early spring's tentative promises. Visible in wave fog carries hints of warmer air, and distant sounds suggest lengthening daylight hours that bring renewed possibilities. Even in London's sooty atmosphere, life persists and adapts, finding ways to flourish despite conditions that seem designed to prevent growth and renewal. Church bells mark time in the distance, their bronze voices no longer urgent with crisis or alarm, but settling into evening rhythms that acknowledge day's end while promising tomorrow's opportunities. The sound carries differently now, less insistent, more comforting, like familiar conversation rather than shouted warnings about dangers requiring immediate response. A quirky tidbit brings gentle smile to the evening's reflection. Some women planted small gardens in window boxes and lodging house corners, bringing beauty into harsh circumstances through flowers that bloomed despite soot and neglect. These tiny gardens represented hope made visible, demonstrating that human nature includes impulses toward creation and beauty even when survival demands might seem to crowd out everything beyond basic necessity. Soft humor lightens a contemplative mood as observation reveals that London pigeons appear better fed than many human residents, yet choose to remain in the grimy city rather than seeking cleaner countryside environments. Perhaps, like the women whose stories fill these pages, they understand that belonging sometimes matters more than comfort, and community provides something that safer isolation cannot offer. Gas lights dim gradually as the city prepares for sleep, their flames lowering in rhythm that suggests collective exhale after another day's struggles and small victories. The lighting transition marks movement from public activity toward private rest, though the city never truly stops, only changes the nature of its restless energy. Movement away from crowded commercial districts toward quieter residential squares reveals London's gentler side, where ordinary families conclude ordinary days through simple rituals of closing shops, gathering for evening meals, and settling children into beds warmed by fires that provide comfort rather than mere survival necessity. Historians continue discovering new evidence of women's agency and community-building efforts that challenge traditional narratives emphasizing only victimization and passive suffering. These scholarly investigations reveal sophisticated networks of mutual support, creative adaptation strategies, and collective resistance that demonstrate remarkable organizational abilities operating despite systematic exclusion from official recognition or legal protection. The contrast between public perception and private reality becomes clear through this evening's reflection. Sensational newspaper stories and moral reform rhetoric created distorted images that obscured the complex humanity of women whose actual lives included friendship, humor, intellectual curiosity, artistic expression, and emotional depth that moral panic narratives systematically ignored or denied. Night shift workers begin heading home as day laborers prepare for tomorrow's responsibilities, creating gentle transition periods that demonstrate how cities maintain continuous operation through overlapping rhythms rather than abrupt changes. The shift change suggests that London, like its human inhabitants, adapts and persists through collective effort rather than individual heroism. The city reveals its capacity for renewal through small signs, a cat washing itself contentedly on a doorstep, laughter drifting from a distant window, the warm glow of lamplight in family homes, where evening conversations create connection and comfort that survive despite urban pressures and social difficulties. Life and hope persist despite systemic oppression, visible in ways both grand and subtle. Children playing in narrow alleys, women helping elderly neighbors with heavy bundles, shopkeepers offering credit during difficult times, strangers sharing umbrellas during sudden rainstorms. These moments of ordinary kindness accumulate into powerful testimony about human nature's stubborn refusal to be entirely crushed by unjust circumstances. You settle onto a quiet bench in Russell Square, away from commercial districts and busy thoroughfares, as the city settles into its gentler nighttime rhythm. Here, surrounded by trees that have witnessed decades of human drama while maintaining their own patient growth, reflection deepens into something approaching peace with the complex truths discovered through this journey in forgotten lives that deserve better recognition than history initially provided. Pre-dawn quiet settles over Bloomsbury's hidden garden square, a forgotten sanctuary where time moves with the patience of old trees and ivy-covered walls that have witnessed decades of London's restless energy while maintaining their own gentle rhythm. The fog begins a slow retreat, revealing glimpses of starlight filtering through the city's perpetual haze, transforming harsh urban atmosphere into something soft and welcoming that invites deeper rest. Now, let yourself settle more completely into this peaceful moment. Breathe in the cool night air, scented faintly with distant roses and the last traces of settling coal smoke that somehow seems less harsh here, gentler than the industrial tang that dominated earlier streets. Feel that breath filling your lungs with calm, carrying away any tension that might have gathered during our journey through these challenging stories. Progressive relaxation begins naturally as you let go of the day's harsh realities. The weight of difficult history starts to lift from your shoulders like fog dispersing in morning warmth. These stories, important as they are, need not burden your body or trouble your sleep. Let your shoulders drop, feeling the weight of these stories settle gently into memory where they belong, honored, preserved, but no longer creating physical tension. Listen to the sound of your own heartbeat, steady and reassuring, connecting you to the eternal rhythm that links you to every human story ever lived. Your heart beats with the same essential pulse that sustained the women whose lives we've explored, reminding you that beneath all historical circumstances lies a fundamental current of human resilience and shared experience. Garden imagery surrounds you now as peaceful ivy grows over old brick walls, softening sharp edges that once marked boundaries between harsh reality and gentle refuge. The ivy moves slowly, patiently, transforming rough surfaces into something more welcoming, just as time and understanding can transform even difficult stories into sources of wisdom rather than distress. The distant sound of the Thames reaches even here, constant and soothing, its ancient flow unchanged by human struggles. Your breathing slows naturally, like the river finding its gentlest current, moving at its own pace toward rest and renewal. No urgency remains, only the peaceful rhythm of breath and water, connecting you to natural cycles that continue regardless of temporary human concerns. Feel gratitude for their resilience flow through you like warm light, honoring the strength and dignity of the women whose stories have been shared while allowing their example to inspire rather than overwhelm. Their courage becomes part of your own inner resources, adding to rather than depleting your personal reserves of hope and determination. Watch as harsh gaslight transforms into gentle starlight, artificial illumination, giving way to natural radiance that has guided countless generations through darkness toward dawn. Close your eyes and let the fog wrap around you like the softest blanket, creating a cocoon of comfort that protects without confining, supports without restricting. Moving from historical consciousness to present peace, allow yourself to release the past into its proper place, while returning fully to the safety and comfort of your current moment. These stories of survival and dignity will rest safely in your dreams, available when needed but not demanding constant attention that might disturb your natural rest. The garden becomes complete sanctuary now, a place untouched by commercial pressures or social demands, where only peace and natural beauty remain. Let your mind drift like morning mist over calm water, thoughts becoming lighter and less defined, floating gently rather than grasping for specific meanings or conclusions. Breathing instructions weave naturally into the peaceful atmosphere. Each exhale releases tension, carrying away any remaining stress or concern. Each inhale brings deeper calm, filling you with tranquil energy that supports rest rather than activity. Your breath becomes your guide toward complete relaxation, requiring no effort, only gentle awareness. The city's sounds fade to gentle background hum, distant enough not to disturb, but present enough to remind you that life continues its patient course while you rest. Feel yourself sinking into comfort, supported by the earth beneath you, held by natural forces that require nothing from you except willingness to receive their gift of peace. Rest knowing their stories are remembered, their dignity acknowledged, their struggles honored through understanding rather than forgotten through neglect. This remembrance becomes part of the ongoing human story that connects all generations through shared recognition of courage, resilience, and hope that persists despite temporary difficulties. Progressive body relaxation flows from fingertips to toes. Let peace flow through you like warm honey, reaching every corner of physical tension and dissolving it into gentle release. Your body becomes completely relaxed, supported, and comfortable, ready for the restorative rest that comes naturally when mind and body align in peaceful surrender. The night sky opens above the fog, infinite and peaceful, reminding you that your personal rest connects to something larger than immediate concerns. The eternal rhythm of day and night, work and rest, struggle and peace that governs all natural cycles, including your own need for restorative sleep. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are drifting toward gentle dreams that will restore your energy while honoring the wisdom gained through understanding difficult but important stories. Let sleep come naturally, like dawn approaching over the quiet Thames, inevitable and welcome, bringing renewal that prepares you for whatever tomorrow may hold. Sleep well, knowing that dignity and hope persist through all ages, that human resilience continues despite temporary setbacks, and that your own rest contributes to the ongoing story of survival and renewal that connects every generation. Rest now, deeply and peacefully, surrounded by the gentle protection of understanding and the comfort of shared humanity. The garden fades into peaceful darkness, complete silence except for the natural rhythm of gentle breathing that carries you safely into restorative sleep, where dreams can heal what waking hours may have disturbed, leaving only peace and the promise of dawn's eventual return. Complete tranquility and rest.